Yeah, you should move up here. By the food. By the food and drinks. Here.
Could you also send me the agenda? She can.
Say hello, everybody. Welcome to the live. This is the United Nations Side Table event called, what's it called? Kayanní, a good path. And we have wonderful speakers here today, and we're super happy to be here and talk to you all, and Yawa for everybody who's here and watching.
Betty.
Betty is going to introduce us and be our host for today. And here's Betty.
Niwa Haskano, Gayaji Gainhia'a. My name is Betty Lyons. It's my colonized name. My Ngwihoi name is Gainhia'a, and I'm the proud citizen of the Onondaga Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. And I am so grateful to be the moderator for today's event. And these brilliant people that we have here speaking today. So I know that you'll learn a lot and hopefully be able to ask a lot of questions as well to all our viewers out there. First, I would like to introduce to you someone that I consider that I look up to very much, Jock Hill, who is a Cayuga sub-chief up in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy up in Six Nations, Ontario. And so I'm so proud to know him, to have listened and learned from him over the years and his guidance. So I'm going to now turn it over to him.
Yawa Haskano Swagwigi. At you dear dinner the Guanoha. A quickie cannot one of the new, the Udoktaji. Nayona ne. Ayawa de Skaya again half say swat on Sandy Jones, what on that. That you we what did wave a gone on cat one day. So I say I'm thankful that all are well and at peace, that this important event today is taking place, and I'm hopeful that it'll be beneficial to everyone with what we're presenting today. Thank you.
Niwaha, thank you so much, Jack. Now I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. John Pomeroy. You're gonna hand you. I'm sorry, I apologize. Will you now do the opening for us, the Ganahanyu?
Yes, I was prepared for that, but I thought with you being the moderator, it's good it comes from you. So I'll begin.
I'm from the boss.
I'll begin with the words we call Ohando, we. That's the words that come before all else, and I will do it in a short manner. It's permissible in our culture to have a short version of Thanksgiving. It doesn't diminish it in any way. Our thoughts are brought together, and also we express our gratitude for all of creation, for our wellness and what we draw from Mother Earth and all that she holds. We say that all the things that she holds, which our Creator has planted, and the things He's placed around the earth for our benefit. And they each have a purpose and they have duties just like humans. Then we move above the earth to all of the workers that work to keep creation in balance and harmony. And if you'll notice, we refer to them and relate to them like family members. So the first is the thunderers. We call them our grandfathers. And then there's the sun, the great warrior that is also our elder brother. And then the moon and the stars, that's our grandmother. And then the four beings, they also are like our grandfathers. And then our great teachers of the past, we always acknowledge our last prophecy message and the great leader that preceded that news. Then we finish with our Creator. So I'll do this in a short way. And since Betty started it off with Onondaga, I'll do this in Onondaga today. Thank you. Down to go here, so what the host you start right when the week wa down you here, some wawine, can no hand you. Can what no way, but the way what don't, what you go has so. You yeah, this got out and why what you go has so. dan wara tino ha sa agwigis kanot wanok tonyo dan se de wan dik de wat GST kaya de ge handa de kana wakti sa ko ge no wakti hati na yo wa ha de sa ye ya gan ha skano sa gen dan se na kan wa ya kat ka gi po hang ge kan wa no we kana wa no wa ha ai we handit ni agwigis kanot wanok tonyo dak ni dokta di and we hik with what the yano nya de ya di skada haji and wa ya wa ni go ha so skara dan war tino ha dan ni yong we dage ya tini yok tik na wa ni go ha na yo na ne ti no ha hwan chi ate a de yon so no wa da ha ti ti no ha fox a de we pa ge o ni ta ni o ho yan twa so ho yan twa I da se na ge hat ka we to no na do we ta we ha ti skanot wa no to ni and we hik with what the yano nya na ye ne what ye ti no ha hwan chi ate skada di ka ho ka cha ni ye wa agwe ki to sa ye ti no ha da tini yok tik wa ni go da nei o na ne ge chun da ha ya na dan ha hui pa ka shang go ho na di ti na ne se go hon das ti sta da ha di wono da ti e ga e sa gwa ni ta di ya da gwa na yo na go da su yo ke da ni do da di ho di yo de ha di o ya di ne ho di wo is ti ha di sa se go ho ya da gwa we he go to di ya no nya wa di ti no ha da to ya ni yo tik na ho gwa ni go da no na ha we I te ni sa ni ga ye ha a we I na ho ho mai hon da and they caught life what it's was going to get the guna situation at the situation no hand quoi a we eat the song what take dani la idea on we that we is the hadi da ni doctor di and we hek with what the ya no nya on a di ya was it one no hand and they caught life what it's start ni of the what ni go da na yo na ha we I na I ga do ga cha ni ga ha we to no the di yo da nan the di yo da no sta và sự cuối hôn đệ à số hệ cả cái của địa sự thích cho đắc thì chỉ nó hết qua này ô nó vì ý hiểu chỉ là nó quá nhiều giá đặc đó thì và được nhiều thì ha thì vì ý thì yung kỹ năng địa sự and we hết với what the nó nhá what địa chỉ nó hết à số hệ cả cái của địa là sẽ chỉ nó quá nhiều sao cái hiện đó thì đó thì nhiều thích là không quản lý có hết đó nó ô nó này cái này hành đi hạt thì nhau hiểu cái hết nó yang kia đang có đặc quy hóa thì cha nó cái nó nó to nhiều đặc gì đó ta thì đàn sĩ họ nát có hết thì cha nhiều cha đi qua ngoài vậy này ở quê kia có yang thiếu đặc quy cha họ nhà nào đấy cha quê hết quê tôi đi nó nhá còn là đi qua đi thì nó hay cái gì này hay là đi yang hiểu cái hết nó đấy thế này cái sẽ đuổi ya đã đã thế đuổi go này nó cái nhà đấy cái sẽ đuổi nó ha đã thì nhiều thì nó gọi này có đó này cho nó hết chụp đó hoặc sao thao hoa chỉ để xong quay đi sai rồi đây đã sang quay nào họ thì the whole set thì họ thì sao nhiều ý hoặc cái nó vẫn học đó nhá anh quay hết quyết bất thì nó nhá what sẽ luôn nó ha đó thì nhiều thì không gọi này có đó này cho nên cái hoặc cái quay nhá thì cái họ hoặc cái cái tắc hoặc đi hoặc cái thì cái nó hay nhá đó này đi anh có quay nhá đi vào sao vậy cái nó quá thì quá này có hay ha cho qua ni quê ni na yo what a gesti ya ka tu hi was Spanish so ya di sai kasti nyanyo ko dan igen dio ko dan ka ni ko hio dan se skano enke dan ai da na ya di aswe hek I ke ha ko ki wo yis ti kai ko da ko dan ni to
Ilaha, Jack, for that.
yo
You know, for what you explained before, you know, this connects us to all living beings. This, you know, it's about remembering that we're a very small part, a very, very small part of the world that we live in. And we're really the guests, you know, we need to be more mindful that he was talking about and greeting all of our relatives and giving thanks for them. We're not better than them, we're equal to them, and we all just have different responsibilities. So thank you so much. Yes, Jack, I would like for you to say a few words now about, you know, the UN water and why we're here today, and the importance of that to our communities and to our peoples.
Yes, okay. Again, I acknowledge everybody listening from all over the world, wherever you're residing, and I would like to again in our tradition we usually say "Skano." That's when I That means to be tolerant of what you're about to hear. It may be just a short presentation of a larger matter with the time allotted. So we always ask for forgiveness if it's a short way of things, and it may be more information that is connected. But we're going to do our best today, and what you're going to hear. So keep that in mind, and don't let any minds be spoiled. That's our tradition there. We humbly begin. So again, I think about when the topic we're on here is about water. Ohniganos, ohnigating yongwe, anadaga, and I think about that term there. Ohnigating yongwe. That means that it's like a life that is running. So the force that the waters have is a life force and an energy and a power that the waters possess. So the waters in our teachings possess their own life and their own water, their own energy force. So they're a part of our ceremonies always. We acknowledge the waterways, and we acknowledge the pockets of water, the pools of water, the springs of water, the wells, and then the larger waters that flow, and also the lakes and the oceans, where there's none left out, even the underground. Nowadays, they call them aquifer. In our language, we'll say Ujinohya Daunyo or Anadaga Ujinohya Dainyo. And it makes us think right away when you hear that, because it's veins. So water to us, our perspective of water is set every time we meet. We have our Thanksgiving address. We have ceremonies at this time of the year. Once we start hearing the thunderers, when that connects us again with the power and the powers behind water, and we have to be careful. We carefully and humbly have ceremony to acknowledge the purpose and the duty of the ones who bring the fresh water, and also that the waters are still flowing and refreshing at this time of the year. It's a great time of renewal and refreshment for Mother Earth and all that she holds. That is all connected with our ceremony, and that's what keeps us in balance and harmony and keeps us in our place with being responsible. The waters that flow are the veins. Kayuga language. That means the veins, and those are the veins of Mother Earth. So it's just like human beings. We have veins all throughout our body, and those veins, they keep us in motion. So the veins of Mother Earth keep Mother Earth in motion and healthy and in balance. That's the perspective from our teaching. So the waters have their own duties, they have their own life, they have their own purpose, just like every other living thing on the earth. And we have to do our best to look after our area where the waters are and to be respectful of Mother Earth. That's her veins. So what we're doing to the waters, we're doing to the veins of our mother who sustains us. That's a constant reminder in our culture, in our teachings. When we have ceremony, when we have gatherings, we're reminded of that. So water is more important than anything else at this time. And we're living in a time where we're seeing so much suffering from the lack of water, from pollution of water, and from the life that water it's showing its power. Water is overpowering some areas. Then you have floods and water damages happening. So it's a reminder we have in our tradition and culture, in our prophecy, that we have to find the balance and do our best to acknowledge that there's a power greater than humans at work in life forces, including the waters. So I know over the generations, the ancestors before me and some who recently left Earth, they spent a lot of energy trying to keep people mindful to respect Mother Earth and respect the water, because the water is our life. That's what that means. That means it's our life, it's our survival. So we have to look after the waters. And in our area in particular, we've done a survey, we've been doing studies and things and finding things out which we were never told. The pollutants that are in our water system. In our area, a lot of it is due to the dams that were put in generation back or so. And the veins need to have a good flushing out. And we think that that may be part of the equation to keeping the water healthy in our area is to flush out those veins and allow them to use their natural filtration system a little while to get back to cleanse. And they work together with the Thunderers. Our grandfathers also are coming right now. They're moving close. And they have the responsibility of renewing the waterways. So we'll be entertaining them in ceremony soon as well. We're right at that point of the ceremonial cycle that the Thunderers will be bringing fresh water. So we've been trying our best to influence people in our area to let these waters that come to flow naturally and let the river use its natural filtration. And that may help us to cleanse some of the waterways in our area here. So I just encourage everybody to be mindful if you're living near water and take a look there. Is there things I know in our area here, and not only around here, but sometimes our own people are polluting that water's edge, and they're leaving metal things around the water, and who knows what else. There's even car parts and things like that, and like all your garbage and things. The water is not meant to be the garbage. So I'll just stop there for now. I don't know about time wise. I'll leave that up to our moderator there, but that's as much as I will say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuaha. And thank you for saying it in Onondaga. It was nice to hear. It's nice to hear you talk. You know, I felt at home there for a second. My son's name is Onegino. And so it's cool water, cold water. So I think about him a lot in these discussions, and how important it is. And once water is contaminated, there is no remediation for it. And it's so important. It's just a reminder. Now I would like to introduce Dr. John Pomeroy. Welcome. He's the director of the Global Waters Future Program, the largest university-led freshwater research project in the world. And at the University of Saskatchewan, he is the Canada Research Chair in Water Resources and Climate Change, Distinguished Professor of Geography, Director of the Center for Hydrology, and Director of the Coldwater Laboratory, Comore, AB. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the American Geophysical Union, and the Royal Geographical Society. Is the 2019 recipient of the Miroslav Romanowski Medal from the Royal Society of Canada, and was the 2017 recipient of the J. Tuzo Wilson Medal from the Canadian Geophysical Union, and serves as Institute Professor of the Biogeoscience Institute of the University of Calgary, and Adjunct Professor of the University of Waterloo and of Wilfrid Laurier University. He leads the International Network for Alpine Research Hydrology Project of the World Climate Research Program, and the founder and former president of the International Commission on Snow and Ice Hydrology. So I would like to welcome you, sir, and thank you so much for your participation.
Well, thank you for having me here, and it's a great honor to be speaking at this event and to address a little bit about water resiliency and how co-development fits into that. And I really enjoyed the opening and the discussion there, because it set the stage so beautifully and so perfectly for the problems that we have. That we have a world, and the next slide, we have a world where water is out of balance because of actions of humans, and its links with nature are a problem. We remember that water is life. Water is the basis for all life and human activity, and it also regulates the global climate. But we interfere with water in various ways through our management, through our alteration of the global climate. And these have created problems, even in Canada, which is seen as a water-rich country. Next slide, please. There we are. We've heard at the UN water meeting about the global water crisis, but let's consider the Canadian water crisis. And yes, we have one. Rapid, record glacier loss in the mountains of the West, even causing diversions of rivers, which have caused lakes like Kayanní Lake to drop by 1.6 meters in one summer as they lose their rivers, which are diverted in a different direction as the glaciers retreat. A massive increase in wildfires, which covers the country from coast to coast and through our boreal forest, and resulting in thinning and browning of our northern forests. The massive flooding in lower mainland BC, $9 billion of damage in November 2021. The river flows were 7 times higher than ever recorded at that time of year. This is what hydrologists would call non-stationarity, where we move out of any statistical patterns that we've seen since observations began. The Southern Alberta flood of 2023, at the time the most expensive natural disaster in Canadian history, of $5 billion of damage, 100,000 people evacuated and several deaths. And that occurred over southeast BC and Southern Alberta. As we go north, the flooding in Whitehorse in 2021 due to glacier melt in the heat wave. And that is something that has never happened in Whitehorse before. So we're soon seeing new things. Of course, the terrible fires at Lytton, BC that destroyed that community and around it. And so we wonder what happens when the temperature hits 49.6. The answer is within a day, your community burns down. That's pretty nasty message from nature there. The ice jam floodings we've had in Hay River and Fort McMurray, Northwest Territory and Northern Alberta, the wildfires in Fort McMurray, the water shortages on Baffin Island. Whoever thought you'd hear that? A city of Iqaluit last summer declared an emergency due to lack of rainfall in the Arctic in the summer. Massive flooding in southern Ontario and southern Quebec, the Maritimes in 2011, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021, causing billions of dollars of damage through vast areas there, heavy rain and rain on snow. Drinking water advisories, as of 2022, still 31 long-term advisories in 27 Indigenous communities, years after the government announced that they were going to work and help solve that problem. It's not solved, which is outrageous in this country. The flooding in Greater Toronto, 1 hour of heavy rainfall resulted in $1 billion of damage because it hit a high-value community. And then the threats to our Great Lakes ecosystems. The estimates of the costs of algae growth and eutrophication, excess nutrients in the lakes, is $270 million per year, just on the Canadian side of Lake Erie alone. And of course, the Six Nations territory in the Grand River involved in that, impacted by that, and the very ecosystem in which they're based is being terribly impacted. And then large algal blooms on Lake Winnipeg and many other lakes throughout Canada, from Lake Erie to the Western Lakes, which can occasionally make these lakes toxic. Buffalo Pound Lake in southern Saskatchewan is a water supply for Regina and Moose Jaw. They had to shut down the water treatment plant about 10 years ago because of the toxicity of water. So these are some of the issues that we have. This is a crisis, and we seem to be sleepwalking through it. Next slide, please. Some of the disasters with this, we have flooding, drought, wildfires, deforestation, permafrost thaw, deglaciation, drinking water advisories, toxic algae, microplastics, endocrine disruptors, water quality degradation. So these are just illustrating some of the issues that we have there. You see poor Lytton, BC in the lower left. And so we need solutions for this. And we need early warning systems, and we need to adapt and work together to better manage our water. We shouldn't be in such a situation. Next slide, please. So just summarizing some of that is, we're in the top 10 globally for renewable water resources per person. We have a very water-dependent economy in this country. But our water availability, most of it is in the north of the country, and most Canadians live in the south. So we have a mismatch in where we live with where the water goes and where it flows. And we have tremendous costs from floods, droughts, and fires. At $28 billion, that was up to 2017. I think it's closer to $40 billion now from recent events. And we're warming up 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the world. And so we're losing our snow and ice, our ice cover on the big lakes, which affects our algae cover. We're getting more intense rainstorms, which moves more soil, more nutrients into our water bodies. And at the same time, we're not managing them very well. So we're coasting into a worse disaster on this. Next slide, please. So some of the estimates for the future costs are $128 billion US in Canada to 2050 from droughts, floods, and storms. And in the US, $4.5 trillion on the US side. So they're going to be hit worse. But for the North American economy and societies, this will impoverish us. The cost of rebuilding could become prohibitive for many communities in many regions. Next slide, please. Again, part of this is we are not managing our water as well as we might have. We've developed in floodplains, we've allowed levees to fail, we've polluted our lakes and our streams, we've allowed forest fire ash to fall on our mountain glaciers, melting them faster. We've contaminated our groundwater and withdrawn it at rates that are unsustainable for purposes that might be straight commercial, but they don't provide a broader benefit to people. So we can't do this. So how do we reach sustainable development of our water in Canada? And you see two sides of a prairie landscape there with wetlands on one side and industrial farming on the other. But water information, predictions, forecasting of floods and droughts, integrated river basin management, ecosystem restoration, better transboundary agreements, safer communities, and reconciliation. It's got to be part of it. We need to commit to water sustainability from individuals to communities to institutions and governments. We need to create, support, and share strategic water research, and we need to find room for co-created Indigenous leadership on water, from science to management, and to make sure Indigenous communities and people are at the table when these decisions are being made. Next slide, please. So Global Water Futures program started 6 years ago. It involves 4 principal universities. McMaster is where the research we're seeing here is largely based, but many others across Canada. Involves over 220 professors at 23 universities and over 1,800 students and engineers and postdoc researchers and others have been trained under the program. So it's very, very large, it's very, very active, and it's we have about over 500 partners and stakeholders that we work with across the country and internationally to get the information out from this vast research program of which our meeting here is part of. So next, please. The mission is to improve disaster warning, predict water futures, and inform adaptation to change and help with risk management. So that information is helping communities deal with the changes that are occurring and helping them manage it better. Next slide, please. The Global Water Futures developed an Indigenous community water research strategy in the first few years of the program. This is prompted by a wonderful visit to 6 nations early in the program, where we learned, we listened and we learned from the researchers based there, such as Dr. Martin Hill and the elders at 6 nations. And so we then worked together. So the first meeting that Global Water Futures had was at 6 nations, on 6 nations territory. And it was jointly held. You see the First Nations Water Security Climate Change Symposium. That was the start of it. So we started with that. We developed regional workshops. We strongly encouraged, as in required, our project and core teams to engage with Indigenous communities. We began to engage more and more with Indigenous nations governments at various levels. And then we held a workshop at Waniscawen near Saskatoon to develop an idea of something different and new, which is co-development of Indigenous community water research projects, with the requirement that they would be co-led by members of the Indigenous community and someone from the university. That's not normal for federal government tri-council research. And so we kind of threw the book away on that, and I'm glad we did. So next slide, please. Because we got these wonderful projects set up and funded and operating. So some of the big ones that started at the very beginning are on the right-hand side in the lower corner, but then the new ones on the left-hand side there. So some doing really innovative things such as water quality sensors co-developed between Indigenous communities and engineering departments at universities. That's never happened before. Indigenous, the Indigenous ecological knowledge training that we're seeing here today. Mattawa water features, knowledge camps in the north, fish net in the north. In northern Western Canada, is the water good to drink? In the Slave River Delta, and co-creation of Indigenous water quality tools. So these have transformed global water futures, and I think are providing incredible information to benefit for all of Canada. Next slide, please. The key principle behind this is that we create, share, and exchange information that the research community needs to integrate with the user community because knowledge comes from both. And together we create knowledge, together we communicate research results, we work to find the appropriate ways for uptake of those results and their implementation. And then we monitor together as well. And the value of that, the power of that came forward in the pandemic because travel was restricted. Many researchers were sitting in their university labs or at home, not in their labs, but the community scientists in Indigenous communities were still able to grab water samples to analyze things, to keep observing. So that carried on. That was very, very wonderful and powerful. So next slide, please. So the future, we need a water future of abundant, clean water. We need to get our climate crisis under control. We need to manage water more sustainably in Canada. And we can only do this through co-creation of solutions from everyone living in the Canadian territory and ensuring that Indigenous communities, Indigenous nations are there at the table and part of the water management to define that solution and that future. So that's what I hope. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pomeroy. That was wonderful. Very, very comprehensive presentation. And I like what you said about, working with all these different universities. I too believe that that's the solution. It has to be, a co-collaboration of learning institutions, Indigenous peoples, and all people's allies trying to make this a better place. So thank you so much for that. And one of my favorite sayings that my uncle always says is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so, for us as Indigenous peoples, it's real. So thank you so much for that. I would now like to introduce Dr. Dawn Martin-Hill, and I want to talk about how proud I am to sit with such brilliant, accomplished women here today. It just makes me so proud to know all of you, to be close to you all, and be part of this. So, Dr. Dawn Martin-Hill holds a PhD in cultural anthropology and is one of the original founders of the Indigenous Studies program at McMaster University. She is the inaugural Paul R. McPherson Indigenous Studies Chair. Dr. Martin-Hill's research is grounded in the principle that solution-based research in the area of Indigenous health must occur alongside building capacity for community collaborations. She has embodied this principle through her numerous community commitments, including serving as the chair of Indigenous elders and youth councils to promote the protection and preservation of Indigenous knowledge systems, serving as an expert witness on traditional medicines, and supporting reconciliation efforts to improve health services delivery to First Nations through the harmonization of traditional medicine in partnership with Six Nation Health Services. While working with communities, Dr. Martin-Hill has led numerous grants funded by both the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and Canadian Institutes and Health Research to conduct Indigenous knowledge research focused on Indigenous youth, women, language, ceremonies, traditional medicine, and well-being. She has served on review committees for CIHR and SSHRC and is currently a member of the editorial board of Sociology and Anthropology and reviewer for International Indigenous Policy Journal. She has led important groundwork on Indigenous peer review capacity in her role as the inaugural chair of the Aboriginal Health Research Network Secretariat. Much of this work included identifying and removing barriers to Indigenous knowledge health research. She also worked to develop a cohort of potential Indigenous knowledge peer reviewers, and she resides on the Grand River Six Nations nation. So, thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. And thank you, Jock, for those opening words and John and Betty for being here. Indigenous is really a creation of many, many years. Jock holds one of the titles to Harvey Longboat, who co-founded Indigenous Studies for me, with me as an undergrad. And I asked him one day, why are you bothering? Because everybody's kind of mad at me because I was taking a lot of the chiefs and grandmothers away from the community to help. And they said because we're gonna need them because of our prophecies. And our prophecies talked about this day that we're now in coming with the water, particularly human health, and the planet just being in turmoil. So they invested all that energy, and Jock being here is important because he holds the title of those guys that wanted to see this day happen, right? So I just feel like I'm just a worker in their world, trying to promote our ways of knowing, and now not in health, but in engineering and hydrology and in spaces that we traditionally haven't been. So I have to say Global Water Futures was incredible. As soon as I said a few things at the PI meeting, and I was the only Indigenous person in the room, few women, and John was on it, and I couldn't believe within a few months it was just all happening. So communication and dialogue with universities and scientists is critical, and I think that GWF has really led that. So I just want to thank you both for those words. So Indigenous was named by the community because we had 4 grants from Global Water Futures, all with different titles. And they said, we're sick of this, Don, just rename it. And then I said, okay, give me a name. And they gave us Indigenous because they knew it was all about water. And whether it's building sensors or developing curriculum for immersion schools, they really wanted that understood in the community. So knowledge translation and mobilization is a really critical part. And what Jock just went over, part of the words that come before all else are is done in our schools every single day. They go to school, it's done in the morning before they leave. So they've grown up, and we go to meetings, whether at university or Global Water Futures, we always start with those words. And I really think maybe if the Western society was taught to care deeply about water from the time they're young, they might not do the destructive things that they have done. So, culture needs to change in the way that we treat each other and the way we treat water. So I just wanted to highlight how important those words are to our people. So one of the things that I looked at closely was the doctrine of discovery, trying to understand the laws that have allowed kind of the destruction to our culture, our way of life, our land, our nations. And a lot of it is rooted in the doctrine of discovery. And a lot of anthropologists have been, coining this term Anthropocene, and I've written a few scholarly pieces in journals about, that's kind of an unfair term that humans are creating, climate change. No, it's not all humans that have done that. There are humans that have sacrificed, mainly Indigenous people, their own personal gain or wealth so that their children would have a future. And so I call it more the colonial scene that we are currently in. And until colonization is dealt with, you're not going to see a change in the culture and in the way people treat the natural world. So until we start moving in a direction that is stated by the United Nations, and I've read the IPCC reports, I've read the climate change reports, they're all touting Indigenous knowledge. Oh, they're holding all this, great climate change knowledge and 80% of all biodiversity, but it's just words and nothing is being done on the ground. As you can see here at this particular conference, you don't see a lot of Indigenous people on the main stage, as I call it. So I think we have a lot of work to do on a global scale as well as a local scale. So our overall research project is mixed methods, meaning it's led by Indigenous knowledge. So people such as Jock, I went around and talked to all the knowledge holders, women in particular, young people, And they're the ones that formed what they wanted out of this research project. And part of it was tools. Six Nations didn't have any sensor data. So we can't tell what is the water quality. And they wanted cheap sensors so that families could buy them, put them in their wells. So they wanted very practical things. And so the engineers, I would go out and recruit them at MAC, and I would bug them until they finally relented and said, okay, Dawn, we'll do this part, but that's all we can do. So I'm kind of the chief pest. I take everything that they want and I go and I harass people like John and say, look, we need this, we need more training, we need young people in the world of science because they're learning traditional knowledge, they're growing up with it, and we need them to also be able to communicate with scientists. So when you want and value some kind of training or skill, usually the world pours money into it. I just need the world to know there are no funds for Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. If your child decides that they want to pursue the kind of knowledge that Jock shares, that he continues to teach future chiefs, future faith keepers, this is about poverty. You have to, either decide, do I want to feed my kids and have a decent house, or do I want to learn from Jock and know the great law and know our ceremonies and understand our ecologies? And it shouldn't be that way, that if you become a doctor in Canada, you are inundated with scholarships and money and support. If you want to become an Indigenous knowledge holder, such as Jock, nothing. So while the UN and IPC and other agencies, NGOs say they value Indigenous knowledge, they're not investing in building that capacity, that culture, and that training. So part of what I do is pushing language, pushing our young people into the field of university. And they think, well, that's not my world. And I'm like, actually, you have a knowledge that is so rare. It is like the finest diamond in the world, and we need access to you. So trying to bridge these worlds for future generations is a big part of capacity building. Also, Indigenous science. I mean, this is kind of my forte. I can tell you now, there's nothing in our science that we need to change. It has stood the test of time. Some of it's over 1,000 years old, and if you said it 1,000 years ago, it's true today. In scientific terms, that's called reliability and validity, and tested over and over again in different circumstances mean it's a law. So I think the great law has nailed it, and we have not had to change anything. I'm just saying, we do have something to offer, and shouldn't be called traditional all the time. That's kind of diminishing, as if our knowledge isn't evolving and new and carrying forward into modern spaces. So I would just like to make that note. So here at Six Nations, what we found, and this is just a tract, I'm not going to get into the politics of this, but that little orange spot is what we got left, and most of the rest of the land is what you would call stolen. They don't have the deeds to it, and they didn't properly pay or their rent for the leases that they did take, and they just kept it. Having said that, the Grand River has over 25 wastewater treatment plants upstream. Most of that flows down to Six Nations, and go to the next one. I got a drone. I hired Mohawk College to drone. I wanted to see what the river looked like. So this is what our river looks like, the Grand River. And you can see where it says start and end. There's dams where those round circles are. So that land is our land. And what they did is they dredged the river so deep that most of the sludge coming up to us from upstream settles along the Grand River. Some of that's from Uniroyal, who happen to make Agent Orange, which has all kinds of carcinogens and other things in it. So there's a lot of damage that has been done for a very long time to the Grand River, and it's mainly along Six Nations. The problem with that, go ahead, is that Six Nations gets their source water, their drinking water, their well water is coming from this water. So we've been testing wells, we've been testing the creeks who are highly impacted by this. So you can see also, just to point out where it says Six Nations territory, you can see that our land from a satellite dish, because we're the only ones who have the oldest Carolinian forest still intact. So that demonstrates, even surrounded by Toronto, Hamilton, and all these urban centers, Caledonia, Brantford, all those cities all around us, we've managed to hang on to our environment a little bit better. And it's not, there's choices made. So here's one of the ways you could see the waste coming into where we live. So the reserve is on this side, on the right side. And then you could see where I think that one is particularly coming from Guelph. So that we have a lot of these tributaries where they feed into our river, and then our source water for the water treatment plant is just around the bend over there. So it's highly problematic, even though they say they're cleaning the water, we have evidence to suggest otherwise. Six Nations have been in a water crisis. We may not have called that because it was normalized to us just to not have water. We accepted it. So in surveys done, we had over 76% of our community dependent on bottled water because our wells had been so highly contaminated, you couldn't use them anymore. We also have a number of other factors that would put us in the boiled watery category, although the federal government's metrics for boiled water advisories doesn't fit Six Nations because it's convoluted. So we didn't get any of the funding that was released by Trudeau. To say the least, we're a water insecure community who's dealing with contaminations of E. coli and other contaminants, phosphorus and so on. So part of our project is developing science, and it was actually the knowledge holders, a group of faith keepers, who identified what they wanted and how they wanted it. And they went towards technology, which shocked me a little bit, but they're forward-thinking people. And they said this technology needs to be in the hands of everyday people. We need moms to feel secure about the water that they're using to feed their babies, as well as young people. So the emphasis became about training young people and engaging them. And the way that we did that, which Makasha will talk about more, is through developing things like virtual reality, digital stories. We gave immersion schools money to create a number of digital stories about water and teachings. We adopted terrace stories. I met them in the Amazon because I worked with the Amazon conservation team for about, 20 years now. And I was out there when they were mapping, it was the Waro and Mato Grosso that were mapping. And I'm like, if these guys can do it, we should be able to do it. So I just digitized ours. So we're doing a lot of technological development with Global Water Futures funds. We involve the kids. Makasha mainly is the one that goes into the schools. We bring in scientists, we train kids from all ages, both immersion and English-speaking schools on connecting with water, telling their stories and developing maps around what they used to do around the water or their parents. And what we're developing is called terrace stories. Go ahead. We were also told by the women specifically to look at health, and Lori's going to address that later in her work. But fundamentally, we were trying to develop a Haudenosaunee wellness model. We worked on this with Guy Wadillo and an advisory team of mental health, and because we were hearing the kids, in particular, Kasha was interviewing some of the kids, and they talked a lot about the terrible anxiety they're having and experiencing over the future because they're flooded on social media with end of the world, we're at the 12th hour of climate, all of that is just, and then our elders are kind of not saying the same thing. So together it makes them, and since we already have a high incidence of suicide, we have a high incidence of historical trauma, I was trying to find ways to empower our young people and not make them feel like this game over, that we had to all work together to find solutions. So it's a very holistic approach to health and wellness, but mental health was a highlight. Maternal health was brought up by Julie Wilson, the director of the Six Nations Birthing Center. We were meeting on a CHR meeting, and she was talking about the impact of water on the homes have never been studied by anyone. So one of my PhD students, Alfroza, teamed up and they did a study, but COVID stopped her field work. So the midwives took over and they did 50 interviews within 3 months. And if you're a PhD student, you know that's like impossible. And they got great interviews. And then they also went to the charts of the participants and they looked at the charts because nobody had even asked these women, with all the studies that big doctors and money have done, they have never asked these women, do you have access to clean water? Which tells you a lot. So the midwives were in fact marking down, this house does not have water, this house has, has to buy water because they would help the women access water for their babies. And what we found was mental health was one of the major impacts of this study across the board with youth as well as with the study Lori's gonna talk about. So one of my other students, and this is the brilliance of working with students, she mapped out with me what contaminants across the country, because we are doing mapping. And what she did was she overlaid the missing and murdered Indigenous women's hotspots with pipelines. And what we found is there's a direct correlation. So I was working with NINDY on the violation of women when it comes to water insecurity in other countries, and information that had been, and I asked my student, hey, let's try this out. And we actually found a correlation. And I do know there's some of these territories really well, because I worked in northern Alberta for a long, long time with the Lubicon. They have mining and man camps up there. So I think a lot of outliers would be mining. I want to finish this. It's in progress. But what I'm saying is women are highly vulnerable, particularly Indigenous women. One of the digital stories, the clan mother that I work with, she wanted us to start with Sky World before we get into teaching kids how to do water monitoring and sensing and history and culture. So all of our data is going to be in this virtual reality knowledge center. I'm just going to show a very, very quick clip here because it took almost 2 years to tell the Sky World story of water. And we have Mohawk College students working with knowledge keepers, language folks on how to put this together and then develop all of our data, scientific as well as traditional. So you'll be able to hear Jock and other people telling stories in the VR. So there's no sound, so we're just gonna skip over it, but you can see it's quite beautiful and it talks about the first words ever spoken in the Sky World before she came to Earth was about water, and then essentially the teachings about water. So our VR can be seen on our website. The next one. We also did a climate change study, and that was by Tariq Dean, a PhD student, and Atla Farain. And that study was specifically for Six Nations to make better decisions. I'm not going to go over his data other than to say we have to do better with First Nations, Indigenous people to get them access to climate change modeling so they can prepare, like he's saying, in the north, they're going to have extreme fires. They don't even have a fire route set up. So nobody's giving them funding to be able to do this. I think matching students with First Nation leaders, elders is important so this work can get done. They get a PhD out of it, we get free data. I don't understand why it's not being done all over, and it should be. So just an example of another modeling. Somebody wanted to know about the methodology. This is for you. I don't know where you are, but here it is. We do have a solid methodology. It was a PhD dissertation and we are published in 3 scientific journals. So it passed peer review. So what it's telling us, go ahead, is our summers are going to be, our springs are going to be almost non-existent, warmer and more unstable flooding and drought cycles. So that's important for farmers. We also do a lot of work with STEM and working with kids. I'm going to leave that in terms of how much. We have done an extensive amount. I cannot believe, and this is the last point here, that Canada, with all of its reconciliation funds, does not bother to support Indigenous youth in science. Give you an example, my granddaughter won a science award, and I went to the teacher and I'm like, ooh, where's the next level, right? The regionals. She goes, what are you talking about? I was like, wait, what? And she goes, there's no region, like we're a federally run school, we don't get to go to the regionals. So these brilliant children that I heard all day who had water solved, who had diabetes solved with traditional diets, all of them were never going to be heard by anyone else except the community, because there's no funding for them to get to any regional, national levels. So this is a problem. So I've been funding as much as I can through Indigenous to get our kids from the STEM Academy locked into the SHAD Academy. But what we need is something similar to the US, who has the American Indian Science Academy, where they mentor young Indigenous people. We don't have that. Other countries do, New Zealand, Australia, Canada does not. That's something we should have for sure. So we just do a lot of incentive driving, and it's been my best part. Yep, there we go. These are the digital stories that all the young people make, and we have them all uploaded on our YouTube. And then these are the outreach activities where our engineers and scientists bring the kids out, and they actually get a credit from the university called a continuing credit. When they get 3, they get a university credit from McMaster. So it's a pathway to science, but it's being done by one project. Tasha's going to talk about her podcast after. We're actually on it, and I want to end with the Sustainable Development Goals. Canada started a Canadian Water Agency. We haven't heard much about it since. We went to a few roundtables, but I had developed models on the way in which, if we were given the opportunity to govern our waters alongside other Indigenous nations, we could probably do an outstanding job. The problem is we are not given that opportunity. We're not at the table, as John says. So we look to NGOs and other organizations to provide us with that, because we could easily under UNDRIP run an Indigenous water agency authority, and we should be, because it is proven once we start running things in terms of managing our ecosystem, we do better, whether it's land or water. And this is just a last note to show you. On the right side is pictographs that the community drafted up. That's climate change. It's virtual reality. It's everything that I've just talked about, but it's translated into a Haudenosaunee worldview and lens. And when I'm talking to community, I use the right side. When I'm talking to my peers and trying to get more funding to keep doing the research I do, I use the left side, because they know what we're doing is incredible. Most scholars are only doing one of those things, and we've done all of those things with very little funding. So I just want to leave it there and thank you, and I'm excited to hear what Lori has to say. I believe she is next.
Thank you so much. Again, it goes back to, how interconnected and how different we think, right, from, and it's like the gift that we need to try to give to our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters about the interconnectedness of all those things that she mentioned, and that's why what she's doing is so unique and special. I don't have the bio for Lori. Do you have that? Would you like to read it? No, she didn't.
Lori,
Okay,
introduce.
Lori, would you like to please introduce yourself? I apologize, we don't have your bio, so if you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be great.
No worries. Segole Segweg. My name is Lori Davis Hill. I am Oneida Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River, coming to you from the McMaster campus today in Hamilton. I have been in the past role of Director of Health Services at Six Nations, and I'm currently working at the Indigenous Health Learning Lodge at McMaster. I'm a long time mentee, I guess, of Dr. Dawn, and very proud to be part of her team. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about water insecurity at Six Nations, drill down a little bit into this component, and share with you the work we've done around the household water insecurity experience scale, HWISE, within our research. You can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to acknowledge the research context and say nyawa to John and Global Water Futures, the Indigenous Project, and Six Nations of the Grand River, which is our research context. And this component of Indigenous involved a community-led project that was designed to include mental health key findings, which contributes differently than mainstream water studies using Indigenous knowledge and the HWISE. Our work's inclusive of ecosystem and human health relationships, which is a major contribution of Indigenous knowledge research. It has been an opportunity for the community to show self-determination in asking our own questions and capturing our own data in the research process. Next slide. As everyone is well aware, the focus of the SDG 6 is clean water and sanitation. And most of the focus over the past has been on the global south. The UN and the World Health Organization have been promoting and monitoring national targets on the progress of WASH, focusing on drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. But we acknowledge that the global north also has challenges with providing universal access to clean, safe, and affordable drinking water for all. Next slide. In Canada and the United States, we know that there is aging water infrastructure precariously housed in homeless folks and unaffordable water due to high water bills. The impacts include communities and households with contaminated water, with pathogens or chemicals, and lack of access to sufficient water on a periodic or regular basis. Recent work shows that there's also places where household water insecurity exists, despite the reputation of being a high-income country. That translates into the Indigenous experience. So while the global north is presented as having secure household water, Indigenous people living in Canada and the United States have experienced daily and long-term deprivation from clean drinking water. Many First Nations continue to live under boil water advisories, including Six Nations, and lack enough water for basic household hygiene practices. Next slide. Some of the myths of water security. Water access being universal, clean, affordable, trustworthy, uniformly governed, and that modern water is the best water are those, in fact, myths. The notion that household water is universal and secure in high-income countries is a product of what Linton calls modern water. The set of ideas, discourses, and practices associated with scientific and Western models of water management. Water is a commodity. Next slide. So focusing in on Six Nations of the Grand River, and just to give you a bigger picture, so you can see exactly where we are. And if you click again, it just shows you again the track, and that orange spot is where we are in the world. Next slide. So as part of the Indigenous project, 66 homes at Six Nations were involved in a water testing sample. And what we were basically doing is looking at households who had their water tested for E. coli and heavy metals. So it was conducted in 2019 and 2020 with the heads of 66 households, of which 65% were female. And like Don said, this was done during the pandemic when outside researchers were not able to come onto the territory. But because our health services has relationships with the community, where they're regularly providing care, they were providing food support, they were providing water support, they were able to go into those homes, they were able to collect water samples, and they were able to do these surveys. So there was a modification made of the HY scale, and that was removal of a question about hands and clothes washing, and then about clothes washing. And then we added a question about how frequently did you or anyone in your household worry that your drinking water would become contaminated? So we next slide, please. So of those 66 responses, 58% indicated that they had marginal to extreme water security. And that was tested. So the household water security scores are tested for correlations with access variables informed by other questions in the Six Nations Household Health and Water Use Survey that asked about drinking water satisfaction, household water access, and satisfaction with community water access. So these were significantly and negatively correlated with HY scores. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, 58% or 38 of those 66 households surveyed were deemed by the HY scale to be experiencing moderate to extreme water insecurity. So this is, I can't flush my toilet because I don't know if I have enough water. I can't have a bath because I don't know if I'll have enough water. I don't know how much water I should use for making dinner because we might be running out. That's a very terrifying state to be in, especially in the midst of a global pandemic. So this is an application of HYs to a Canadian First Nations context that hasn't been seen in other publications. And it's in keeping with recommendations to expand the use of HYs beyond low-income countries. Attention must be paid to the impact of access to water on mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And this is a model that from the First Nations context that can be applied in many, many other contexts. So it was a very eye-opening for us, and it was an extremely powerful message, I think, that needs to be heard and replicated in many other opportunities. So I now turn this presentation over to my longtime friend, neighbor, and colleague, Dr. Beverly Jacobs, the government.
Before she begins, I know that Jack has to leave us, unfortunately, a little early today, so I was wondering, Jack, if you would be willing to give us a few closing words before you depart.
Yes, I thank you, and thank you to Bev there. Sorry to have to take your slot there, but
We'll let it slide.
Bev and I go back, way back, and I'm sure that we'll even out somehow, huh, Bev? I just would like to say that I acknowledge all the presenters today, and as far as we've come with this information, and I really feel that we're really only, it's like you're peeling something with layers, and we're peeling them layers away and examining as them layers are being taken off, and we're getting more understanding. And we're weighing what we're seeing and all of these statistics and the environmental change that's happening, not only in our area, but in the world. And we're weighing all of that and balancing that with our traditions and our teachings and our prophecies, that which have been preserved and passed down. And it's a very complex process that we're engaging in. And it's a good mixture of science. It's a good mixture of Indigenous knowledge. It's a good mixture of men and women working together, and of children and youth working with elders. So overall, this work that has been has went on. It has been very. I guess it's been building bridges for amongst people and amongst organizations. We've been having to learn to work together. And banging on doors sometimes, and sometimes overcoming challenges and adversity. So this has been it's been a challenging but rewarding experience as far as this has came along with the water, understanding our situation with water, and how does that connect with our teaching and prophecy. And what can we do? What should we be doing about it? And that's where we're trying hard to blend that knowledge. While we still have knowledge carriers, we're still pretty fortunate that Haudenosaunee, our ancestors invested, and they invested their energy and time selflessly. And I'm very thankful that I spent my entire adult life being educated, and sometimes at our own funding and things like that. And I think that we have a lot to offer the world in understanding what's happening in the world, and not to despair. That we should not despair, but we have to remain focused and be more committed. And we need respect, just like the treaties that were made, to respect one another's voices as equal. That's right across the board. The men and the women, the children, the leaders, the countries some countries are going all out and taking down all the obstacles to see what needs to be done. I'll share one thing before I have to depart. I'm sorry I can't stay for the whole duration, but I'm also a doctor amongst our people, and sometimes this work takes me when it's needed. So I thank you for joining you today, but I would like to share my own personal experience. for as long as I can remember, at this time of the year, we're in here in our area, we've always went, and it's been a tradition, especially for us young men, and when I was younger, the boys and connect with the young men and the older men, and we would go on outings to get fresh fish this time of the year because they run, it's just like the maple syrup season. It has a season that maybe 4 to 6 weeks that where we can secure fresh fish from the creeks and streams coming off of the lakes. And for my entire life, we made our fish traps of our own. Sometimes we use willow, other times we use modern things like I remember using bicycle rims and just putting whips to make it like a funnel that the fish would go in and they wouldn't come back out. I've done that as long as my memory goes back. And when we done this water survey and the scientists started showing us how bad our waters were, I haven't caught a fish in our streams in my area since, because they said it was just like eating from a bag. Some of it areas where there was that much pollution in there that it's like battery acid and things like that that could eat our innards. And I've consumed over 50 years of that. I can't imagine what my innards must look like, because I've ate fresh fish every year. And again, I ate fresh fish again this year, but I tried to go closer to Lake Ontario this spring. But it has affected a traditional activity that I've enjoyed, and my son, now I got grandsons, and we have to look around to what we can do to maintain our traditional activity and our traditional lifestyle. It's connected with our traditional wellness. So the water, it connects with everything, including health and wellness and physical activity and enjoyment and entertainment. So water is so important. Thank God, that's what it says in our language. It's of a high level to our being and our existence. So I just wanted to close with that the research that has taken place up to this point, and it's by no means complete, that it has shared information directly with me and my family, which nobody has ever told me don't eat those fish, or how contaminated the Grand River is, and where the contamination coming from. About I'm going to say about 25 or 30 years ago, I used to always travel with the chiefs, our late Confederacy chiefs. We call them Hodianiso, and I always traveled with them, and I usually was their driver. And I attended one time, we attended a huge water conference about 25 or 30 years ago. It was the Grand River Conservation Authority, they're called. And there was over 2,000 delegates in there. And we went in there, and one of the faith keepers, he says, we're going to take this stage and we're going to make them hear us. I go, what? He goes, come with me. So him and I went up, and we took over the meeting, and they said, we have an agenda. And he said, we're your agenda for at least a part of your meeting. We're the owners of this area. We're the Indigenous people of this land and this river. So you're going to hear our elders speak. So we commandeered that gathering, and we had 2 elder chiefs with us, Chief Arnie General and Chief Harvey Longboat. We also had a few other faith keepers and a few men with us. And because at that time we found out about these Unaroyal and these companies dumping pollutions, and they would have chemical spills, and we would be the last ones informed of it, but it was coming right down our way. So at that time, they were looking at solutions for the Grand River. And my uncle, he said, what we want is for you to reverse what you're doing altogether. And to start with, we want you to put your intakes downstream from your town, all the way along the Grand River. Every town has to reverse, so their intakes are downstream, or their intakes are downstream from the town. That way they'll care what they're dumping in that river in their area. They think, well, dump in the river, forget about it. The next town has to deal with it. So he laid that, and they laughed at him. But it does take something of extreme nature to get through to some people. And this is what is happening, is that the money is drowning and blinding people. And in the meantime, the people who don't have it are the ones footing the bill. So that was my observation. I'd like to share that with you, an experience, and that impacted me. That was over 30 years ago. Our chiefs and faith keepers and elders laid that in front of this group that claimed to have conservation and stewardship of the Grand River. Well, he laid a fine plan there to change your intakes downstream. Then you'll start caring what you're doing to your stretch of the river.
Mm.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that you told that story and that you shared that with us, because it's important for people to understand how it affects us in such a personal way. So, for that, and safe
You know.
travels to you and where you're going today. You do a lot for our community, so thank you so much.
Ona.
Yeah, well, take care, everyone. Ona.
Now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Beverly Jacobs. She is the Senior Advisor to the President on Indigenous Relations and Outreach at the University of Windsor, and Associate Professor in the Faculty of Law. She held Associate Dean Academic and Acting Dean appointments in the Faculty of Law, and she practices law part-time at her home community of Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, and wherever we ask her, Frank. Just gonna put that out there. Her research focuses on Indigenous legal orders, Indigenous holistic health, Indigenous research methodologies, and decolonization of Eurocentric law. Beverly has obtained a bachelor's degree of law at the University of Windsor in 1994, a master's of law degree from the University of Saskatchewan in 2000, and a PhD from the University of Calgary in 2018. So I wonder what's next, right? Beverly is also a consultant researcher, writer, public speaker, and her work centers around ending gendered colonial violence against Indigenous peoples and restoring Indigenous laws, belief, values, and traditions. A prolific scholar, her published work has earned her numerous awards, and her research combined with her advocacy has translated into national and international recognition. And she wants me to stop. And I understand that you could see her full bio on our program for today. She is brilliant, and I love her to pieces, and I am just proud to be able to introduce you.
Scano Suego, Giaso Goenki, Ginagihaga, Ned White, Shelton. So, yeah, greetings of peace to you all. I told you my real name, my Mohawk Bear Clan name is Goenki, and it means she's visiting. So, my name is kept me busy.
Traveler.
Visit everywhere, and I have lots of visitors. And it's also a very, not just physically, that physical visiting, I have lots of spiritual visitors. And also learn a lot every day. So I have been working, Dawn has made me work with her, I should say. Just like Betty. My commitment to my community and my people and everything I do and the love of my people is everything that I've done and committed to all of my life. And so anytime my friends and my community and anytime I'm there to help and do whatever is needed. So I was raised traditionally in my community at Six Nations, Longhouse person, attending ceremony inside. Jock is like family. Actually, he is family. It's my cousin. But our Longhouse family is, we have a big family, and when you attend ceremony, you're you end up in spaces and places that you never think that you would, and it's just that responsibility, and I've taken that to heart in the work now that I do. And I know sometimes I don't feel like it's work, it's just things that have to get done, and so yeah, so I've been helping and working with Dawn on the governance lead for the Indigenous project, and And I just, in my PhD as well, I focused on holistic health of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne, which is all of us. It's the same laws, same understanding. And like Dawn in her opening is the acknowledgement of the Thanksgiving address and the focus that we have. So I always think when we're talking about governance, I think about it differently, because this is governance, our relationship to the natural world. And so when we're talking about, so we're talking about governance and leadership, that I take the point that we're all responsible, and that we all have a responsibility to everything that's in the natural world. And that when we're talking about our relationship to the water, again, the water is the leader. The water is everything. And so, but we also as humans have to have that reciprocal relationship. We always have to give thanks. That's part of our ceremonies. That's part of our relationship with the natural world, and our cycle of ceremonies. We're always giving thanks. Everything that's happening in the natural world, our ceremonies that we participate in, is always giving thanks, and that reciprocal, because we believe that if we don't, then we're going to lose them. So part of that is understanding that giving thanks to the waters of the world, that the water is fulfilling their responsibilities that they've been taught or told, given by the Creator. And so this is just a small acknowledgement. So every speaker, so when they're doing the Thanksgiving address, always says something differently, or always describes something differently. So this is another example of that description of the water. And so the responsibilities of water are many, and that central to them is to drink water, to quench the thirst of life. And that this was captured by one of our Mohawk elders when he said that our Creator made those rivers and lakes, and that he said whenever you're dry and thirsty, you're able to go there. And any river, any stream, any water, that it quenches your thirst. For that's how Creator made water. Next slide. So when I'm trained as a lawyer, but I'm also trained as that person who is responsible to all of creation. And being a Haudenosaunee woman in our community is a huge responsibility. And so when I started out in law school, when I made a decision to go into law, it was a really difficult decision. And my dad, who was one of a traditional man, very strict, was really worried about me going into law and that I would get lost. I reminded him before he died a couple of years ago that his strictness and his and my family, Jacob's family, really ingrained that responsibility of being put in a Haudenosaunee and participating in ceremony and acknowledging all of the time. That's what he taught me, and he grounded me. My family. I say my dad because it's my dad's family that my mom married into, who was impacted by residential school. So I've seen the difference. I've seen the traumas in my family as a result of that. So I say that very openly about that responsibility of going into this field of law. And so when I finished law school, it was the horrible experience ever, to learn about colonial law and how it's been used as a tool to erase us, trying to erase us as a people. and did my master's in law, and wanted to focus specifically on our law, Haudenosaunee law, and I looked at the Great Law piece as our international law. And so I asked our language speakers, I asked them if there was a word for law. And they said, no, there isn't actually, but our ways of being. So our way of life, our ways of being is really our laws. So then I started looking at all of our sources of law. So what is our laws that enable us to be who we are? And there's so much, just natural law, we're following natural law. Our wampum belts, Gaswenta is one of them, our creation story, the Great Law. And as I'm getting more deeper and deeper into our teachings and our ways of being and learning about the impacts of colonization on our law, because it's so patriarchal and violent, that it's had a huge impact on our women. And so women are speaking up now, and one of my clan mothers, her name is Louise McDonald, has talked about mother law and about the responsibilities of the women in Haudenosaunee. And also acknowledging that our laws are very feminine. When you think about how the sources of our laws, creation story starts with the Sky Woman, the story of the Great Law begins with acknowledging Jigonsasa as the first clan mother, our songs, our planting songs, our seed songs, all of them are about women and the role that we have and our responsibility, and also giving life and the responsibility of women. So all of these are coming through and acknowledging that these are our ways of being. And then when we start talking about the water, everything within it is all about water. When you think about like the creation story itself, was it from water? We landed on the turtle's when Sky Woman landed on the turtle's back. I also say art is a source of our life, because our artists are able to visualize our ways of being. And even our wampum belts themselves, I think, are pieces of art, like just how they've been designed and how now we've been able to use them as a tool to remember. And I really believe that's why we've been able to maintain, because of all of those tools that we now have today to remember them. So in thinking about that relationship that we have to the water, like wampum in itself comes from water. So so we have been able to have that connection since time immemorial. When we think about wampum and the design of them and where they come from, the shells themselves coming from the water, and the sacredness of that, and how we've been able to design even ceremonially some of the pieces of our ceremonies and leadership is through holding the wampum and the sacredness of that, and that it's passed down from our leaders, our chiefs and our clan mothers. When they have the string of wampum that's being passed down, that's how old it is when someone else is carrying that, and that they hold the spirit of who holds it before them. So when you think about that relationship, the spiritual relationship that we have to the water and all of those physical things that we have and see is what we carry and what we remember in our wampum belts. And that part of understanding also the role of women in Haudenosaunee ways of being, that our clan mothers are the decision makers and the life givers, and understanding the role that we have to our families as role models, as mentors. One of the things that Gaji Cook, also from Akwesasne, has cited is that women are the first environment. and carriers of our babies and, you know, carrying our babies in water, that's our first environment is in water, as a spirit and during our pregnancies. So our water has to be pure and has to be acknowledged in that relationship that we have from the time that we're conceived, to the point where we are right now. The point where we are right now, as women, we're targeted. I would say the worst of the worst in being the highest numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited. And this one is really difficult because I say it's the worst of the worst of the worst is when our women are violated from, you know, violence in the first place, but being thrown in the bottoms of polluted rivers and lakes and or buried and discarded. You know, and this is real difficult for even for myself personally. My own cousin was pregnant and murdered, buried in our own community by one of our own Mohawk men, young men. So that's like the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. So this is what we're dealing with today. And so I also acknowledge the artist who is the late Brad Bonaparte from Akwesasne, because when I was first starting my research of my PhD, talking to Gudgie, and she had mentioned this piece of art, and I looked for it. It was actually on the cover of the International Joint Commission, one of their reports in the late 80s. So he had already cited that in his work. So then working and through talking about law, when we're talking about sovereignty, nation to nation relationship, right? The Gaswanta is what describes our relationship with the colonizers. And so I looked at it as in doing that research about law, that for us as Haudenosaunee people, right, on the one line, the one journey of our canoe is our laws, right? And then in their ship is their, what they hold is their laws. And so for us, and this was a continuous message from the knowledge holders and what I've been raised with, is that under our law, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to look after, to take care of, to monitor, to give thanks. That's our responsibility. That's our law, to be responsible. When we start talking about colonial law, all of a sudden there's this concept of rights, right? So we get caught into this concept of I have a right to health, I have a right to fish, I have a right to hunt, right? But it becomes an individual right. And that's how the whole right system is about, this liberal idea of rights, that I as an individual have a right. So the whole idea of Gaswanta was that we were to have a healthy relationship. That was the whole idea, and it was based on trust, friendship, and respect. Those principles of our relationship is about a healthy relationship. So if we are to have this healthy relationship with each other, so if I say I have a right to healthy water, I have a right to clean water, then what is my responsibility to the water? So because we've had such a huge impact from colonization, like many of our generations have disconnected from those responsibilities. So now we're having to re-educate, to talk about our responsibilities. So through this whole role of governance is how do we, you know, after everything that we were learning from from this project and the work that Dawn's been working and all of the research that's been done, how do we bring that back to our community? How do we bring that back to the women in our communities, to the men, to the youth, when we're all living in trauma? When we're all trying to live every day and surviving every day, trying to find water every day, trying to eat every day, when we want them to be responsible to the water, to be responsible to the natural world. So we established a grandmother's council, and but because of COVID, we had lots of impacts. The mothers, the grandmothers, they want to meet in person. It's different to be able to have these conversations and to come up with some solutions in the community to talk about our responsibilities and how do we educate our people? How do we get them to see by them throwing stuff out the window, by throwing their stuff into the waters, that this is the cause of what we're dealing with today? Because a lot of times they're not understanding that direct relationship, just having to survive on a daily basis. So my focus has been as well is honoring the youth. So as you know, with Makasha and even in Carissa, you know, the young women that are coming up to train them, to mentor them, to understand all of this knowledge. And now with the role of our young men and young women is bringing back our ceremonies, the rites of passage ceremonies, to teach them about their responsibilities. So that is where we're at and what we're working towards, and wanting to really focus on those responsibilities of our laws and what that means. Like, we can talk about it, we can, you know, say all of this, but what does it mean actually on us as an individual, with our clans and our families and within our community? So that's, we're talking about governance, it means everybody, that everybody's responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, it reminds me of like the discussion about, you know, when you were talking about, we're always thinking of our individual rights, and yet they never talk about the rights of the water, the fish that inhabit the water, the plant life, right? It's always such an individualistic, you know, perspective, and so I really love that you brought that in to the discussion. I'm now going to introduce to you Nidhi Nagabahatla, and I hope that I did not, you know, wreck that name too bad. Is a senior research fellow and cluster coordinator, climate change and natural resource program at UNU CRIS. In this capacity, she will be coordinating projects, programs, and activities of the cluster while contributing to environmental governance related activities and outputs, collaborating with small staff networks. And she is also the project leader at UNU CRIS for GCRF Global Seaweed Star, Safeguarding the Future of Seaweed Aquaculture, a partnership with the Scottish Association of Marine Science, focusing on developing countries in East Africa and Southeast Asia. And she is a sustainability science specialist and a systems analyst with 21 years of work experience. And so she has led and coordinated and implemented transdisciplinary projects in various geographical regions of Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, working with international organizations, and she's affiliated with leading academic institutes. And so I want to welcome you today to this conversation. Where did she go? And appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to see, if I may call, friends and community that I've spent a couple of years with, working together, co-creating knowledge. So greetings from Belgium, and I'm so glad to be contributing my few cents to this discourse. 5 simple points to live and leveraging existing tools towards Indigenous inclusive water governance. There couldn't be a better time to having this discourse. UN is convening after 46 years to discuss the agenda of water after 1977. I'm glad that in these years, in these more than 4 decades, we have had knowledge products that have pointed to gaps and needs in making water inclusive towards inclusive agenda for water governance. I also want to take your attention to the report that we launched yesterday on partnerships and cooperation for water. And having as a core team of this report, I personally took reference of pointing out gaps in including Indigenous people, their knowledge, their insights into partnership and cooperation frameworks. Perhaps we have several modalities in place, but we don't have mechanisms to, as Dawn pointed out, to operationalize those modalities. So I encourage you to look at this report, and as a part of several other reports, I will also take your attention to the report on 2019, Leaving No One Behind. While writing this chapter, I specifically made a reference to Indigenous project to show that as a case study, as a reference for other Indigenous communities to take note of, so they can also bring their insights and perspectives into these global knowledge documents, if I may. And I'm glad that having being a part of the Indigenous team, for working closely with community and Dawn for past years, I have still remained active even after getting transferred to Europe. So sort of operating from a distance, but close at heart. I think we have had occasions where we have to make conscious effort in bringing this voice to the forefront. We did that on several fronts, even sitting here. I'm glad that Makasha was available on several occasions to speak at our events here in Europe, so that we can showcase the project. We will be able to make this bridge between Indigenous communities in different parts of the world, showcasing the project as a success story. So having said that, my point one is a very simple message and reiteration of what I've heard in the past hour and a half. Let's start focusing on mechanisms on how to enhance acknowledgement of the importance of Indigenous knowledge in addressing water insecurity, the valuable insights it can bring in shaping adaptation and resilience building frameworks specific to the local context, to the specific settings. I think unless we acknowledge, and to a large extent, projects like Indigenous have played a significant role in mainstreaming that acknowledgement at national, regional, and even at international level. And I'm glad that we are sitting here and furthering that acknowledgement. Point two, again, a very simple message. We need specific policies, or even I would say points in our policy to focus on specific needs of youth and women. Why to separate out these groups? Because because of disaggregated impacts of water and climate crisis, and promoting the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge and research throughout international governance frameworks. And that's where I see the role of agencies like UNU working closely with Global Water Futures Project or communities in general to make a bridge between the local and the global. Point three, again, to also ensure that the private sector intrusion at community and national water affairs remains a transparent agenda. And I'm glad, and I would like to highlight the work. I've followed it closely, what Makasha has done in creating not just outreach between and among stakeholders, but also kind of educating people to take note of this under-reflected dimension in water governance. Point four, of the water stewardship, literacy, and resilience for the private sector remains crucial if we have to make that bridge with community. Water stewardship boosts or enhances the role of private sector in ensuring inclusive and holistic water management and adhering to community norms, to Indigenous practices, if they are operating in those regions and settings. collaboration is key. And that's where I pointed out the report that we launched yesterday. However, we are still very short of information, knowledge, and case studies from Indigenous communities. You hardly see a mention here and there in chapters and recommendations. And how do we boost more inclusion in these global reports? Because these global reports go a long way in influencing national policies, in positioning the narrative, in filling gaps, in prioritizing needs. So it might be a slow process to integrate all this, but I think with projects like Indigenous, we have a chance. When I started working on this agenda closely with McMaster, UNO INVE, and the community, I was just staggered by the numbers that we could dig from existing information. I mean, so many, one would not imagine sitting outside Canada that this is we are talking about communities in Canada. So this was really appalling to see that we had so much ground to cover, and thanks to Dawn community and the whole project that we have come a long way through discourse, dialogue, exchange between people from different disciplinary backgrounds, exchange between people from different experiences and skills. And all these events that we conducted together, we participated, we exchanged. I think that has not only enhanced the knowledge of people working in academia, but it has been a win-win to my knowledge for all. One of the key reports that I would like to flag here is the Global Assessment Report of Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem. This report was a milestone in incorporation and integration of Indigenous and traditional knowledge that was done very systematically from day one. When we formed this platform, when the work was commissioned, there were representatives from 21 nations, Indigenous representatives coming from that background, trying to voice how indicators that were usually quantitative in previous all the reports can also take a shape of a story or narrative. So it's not always we have to depend on quantitative information. Experiences, stories, narratives are all a part of the discourse. And this is the first time we could put that all in a very formal report. And I have discussed this report with Dawn and colleagues on several occasions, and still it remains a kind of a milestone in UN reports. Other modalities, and I'm sure you all are aware of this, but let's kind of walk through them again. The United Nations has several modalities and platforms as an entry point to discuss Indigenous issues, the permanent forum, the expert mechanism, the special rapporteurs, and UNRIP. UNRIP, of course, has more of a general standards of or guiding principles, but to make use of this directive of, I may call, if I may, into sectoral policy reforms is something that we have to stimulate ground up, but also kind of create that integration mechanisms at national and subnational levels. I do understand the limitations of these global governance tools. They are not legally binding, but they can certainly be a guiding tool to reform and refine policies to be inclusive and representative. From Canada, if we kind of meta-analyze how UNRIP has been integrated or has not been integrated, it's a mixed response. One of the critiques say that it's more talk than action, but I do understand that such integration can be very slow. Within the government level, things work at a slow pace, but with nudge, with information, with knowledge, things can be channeled to a desired outcome. Well, we also have a number of other case examples where integration of UNRIP has positively influenced a number of other UN programs. So as UN programs are integrating UNRIP in their programmatic mandate, I think it creates example that nations and provinces can also do that. For example, the UN Habitat has picked Article 8J The Convention of Biological Diversity has picked Article AJ. The UN Habitat has put forth several other articles from UNDRIP. So it's selective integration, but we do have case studies that reflect on integration. Similarly, UNESCO's policy on engaging with indigenous people also integrates the UNDRIP article on right to conservation and protection of environment and productive capacity of their lands or territories and resources. FAO's policy on indigenous and tribal people takes care of all these fundamental norms that apply or that are reflected on UNDRIP. So very good news from the FAO side, and slowly and gradually you see these norms or you see these guiding principles reflected in their projects and in their programs. The World Bank, very conventional or on using more contemporary approach, has also dedicated a program to indigenous people to channel financing through their programs. They are now vetted through indicators that includes sensitivity to indigenous knowledge. So another example to take us forward in integration. Sustainable development goals, again, are guiding principles. They're not a blueprint for sure, but at least they are paving way for a discourse. And in many examples you see, especially in SDG 15, 16, and 17, you do find a lot of mention of indigenous integration as a prerequisite to inclusive partnerships and strong institutions. Similarly, human right to water has again given us a set of qualitative and quantitative indicators to measure water security through a human right lens. So we do have these instruments in place. The idea is to operationalize them, to integrate them in your own outreach, in your own synthesis that are context specific. There are other things I'll not go into detail. The water security framework, for example, is pretty inclusive of financing commitments of peace and political stability as an overarching element in ensuring that there's harmony between different stakeholders at community level, at state level, at provincial level. UN has also done its bit on dedicating UN days on especially the March, the World Water Day. In 2019, we had a dedicated focus on all indigenous people and the human right to water for people and communities worldwide. Let me close with that. The Water Action Decade, again, is a platform that's allowing us to look into those under-reflected dimensions that we could not integrate in the past. But with the new commitments on board coming from this very, very timely UN Water Conference 2023, where today we heard that 300,000 kilometers of river and 215 million hectares of wetlands will be protected and restored by combined efforts of member states. Let's take this as an opportunity to voice the case of indigenous people's inclusion in fulfilling this agenda, to taking a note of this famous, I must say, quote that has been guiding this UN conference. Let's be the change you want to see. And we can only steer this change if we do this together, if we do this holistically and in an integrated way that we preach. So to walk the talk together on fulfilling this Water Action Decade agenda. Thank you.
Oh, now
Thank you so much for your presentation. Again, it kind of, your presentation, you know, how important policies are, that there are definitely many different instruments and international laws, conventions, and instruments that are used. And it also demonstrated like where we are and how much further we have to go in that process. And I often wonder, when we talk about having to have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, why do we have to have something separate? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, again, we have, you know, the Convention on Human Rights, the Convention of the Child. There's so many different things, and yet because we are not seen strategically as not human, right? We're put in this subcategory. because with the flora and fauna, so that also they don't have rights. All of our relatives that can't speak for themselves, we don't have rights and they don't have rights. And so I want to thank you for acknowledging that and showing that and demonstrating that. So a great presentation. Next, I want to introduce Carissa. Carissa is a Turtle Clan mother, is a Turtle Clan Mohawk woman. Yeah, I'll get in trouble for that. Let me say it one more time, everybody.
Done now. It's
Sorry, Carissa, yeah. Carissa is a Turtle Clan Mohawk woman of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And she resides in 6 Nations with her twin daughters, Luna and Nova. She has an honors Bachelor's of Arts degree from York University, where she double majored in interdisciplinary social science and multicultural and Indigenous studies. Carissa hopes to couple this Western knowledge with the guiding principles of the Haudenosaunee to continue her work in advancing Indigenous and natural rights. While at York, Carissa was involved in student advocacy for 4 years on the Executive Council of the Aboriginal Students Association at York. During this time, she facilitated presentations and spoke on several panels on various topics and issues around racism, inclusivity, barriers, residential schools, and intergenerational trauma, to name a few. She has shared her research on border issues at various conferences, including the Critical Ethnic Studies Association Conference of 2015, University of Buffalo Storytellers Conference 2016, and North American Indigenous Studies Association Conference in Hawaii in 2016. I want to say that, I've known Carissa for quite some time. I also want to encourage everyone to continue to read their bios online for the presentation, but to say that, as a young woman, I remember when you first came to the UN, and it was amazing, the strength that you showed everyone in your determination, to be able to present, and you did it in such a beautiful and lovely way. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because you gave me hope that year. I remember sitting there and I looked at you and I thought to myself, well, good, I can go home today. I can get a nap. It was amazing and powerful, so thank you.
Thank you. Nyango. Wakuni horaro se wego gajiso gwasniwak sanoda ne ongo hongwe neha Carissa ni yungya sanor ni wakitoloda kanagahaga ni wongo hinjoda oswega ni wageno. Wakatsnuni jigon idowis. Hello everybody. My ongo hongwe name is Gajisto Gwas. It means she scatters the embers. My English name is Carissa. I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan. I'm from 6 Nations. However, I grew up I was born in Buffalo, New York, and raised in Fort Erie, right across the river there. So I grew up right along the Niagara River. And I want to first off thank you all for holding in here with us and sticking this out with us. I know what long days and nights it is to be here, and it's a lot of information. And at the end of the night, you're so tired. It's like I'm just too tired to eat. But so thank you all for being here and sticking it out with us, and thank you for my panelists who've gone before me. And I'm really incredibly honored and humbled to have been asked to come and sit on this panel. At first, I thought I was just going to be the worker bee. I'm the community coordinator for Indigenous, but newly appointed Indigenous promo girl.
I love it.
Yes, but I thought my role would just be kind of behind the scenes more so, and Dawn said, no, you need to present because your story is important. My story it's of Indigenous and their ability and capacity to build capacity and to look at young people in our communities and say, I see you, I see what you're doing, and I'm gonna lift you up. I'm gonna lift up your voice, and I'm going to kind of give you that olive branch that I never even knew existed. I'm a first generation post-secondary student. My parents, they just thought get through high school, that was the limit for me. And my sisters and I, we surpassed that. And I'm thankful that I have sisters that kind of were able to lead the way for me. So we talked about the creation story quite a bit today. And so my journey growing up kind of urban, my grandmothers are both Mohawk on the maternal and paternal side. They're both Mohawk from 6 Nations. However, they're both enfranchised because they married Haudenosaunee men from the south side of the border. So they married my paternal grandmother married a Seneca from Cattaraugus, New York, and my maternal grandmother married a Tuscarora. So both of them were enfranchised, and that's what led to their dislocation in Buffalo and where I grew up in her too. And but my parents quickly moved us to Buffalo. And so when I grew up, I was a little bit, as Bev was saying earlier, there was like a disconnect. And I grew up with that. I grew up, even though, you know, my parents, they did the best that they could, intergenerational survivors of residential schools. They gave us the best knowledge that they could. We were really engaged with our Native community there, which is a strong Haudenosaunee presence. However, inside of myself, I felt still like a disconnect. And so I grew up and I've had a lot of struggles along my path, and as a lot of Indigenous youth struggle. And it took a lot of scary experiences, near-death experiences, for me to finally wake up and for me to finally understand that, you know, there is something greater than myself out there, and there is something out there, like, Creator loves me and wants me to live a different path. Like, I can't wait until I'm 45 years old for my dad, like, to straighten up. I need to do it now because there's work to be done. And so when I turned my life around and I started walking a different road, I really clung on to our stories. And they helped save my life because they gave me a sense of understanding about who we are and where we come from. They gave me a sense of purpose. They helped me to understand that I do matter here, and I do have a very important role and a responsibility here. Everything at the time of creation has a role. And when we say our Ohandogari Wadeko, our words before all else, we talk about those things and what their roles are. We talk about the birds and how every single morning they sing their songs, and that's to lift up our heads, to lift up our spirits, and to, if we're having a hard time, we just hear those birds and we lift up our minds. We talk about those fish, and their responsibility was to gobble up everything that comes into the waters, to keep those waters clean so that the humans, the four-legged, for all of us who depend on the waters, so that we can continue to nourish off of them, to continue our life on earth. And then we see those fish today that are coming up deformed. And it's heartbreaking because they are getting deformed because they're upholding their instructions from Creator. And we are not. We are the only ones in creation who have not upheld our original instructions. And so for me, that became a sense of guidance and direction in my life, is to do my best to uphold my responsibilities as a Ongohongwe woman. So as our creation story teaches us, the earth is female. The earth is female, water is female. And so where we come from our mother, because we follow that matrilineal, the mother line. So when I say I'm Ganagahaga, that means people of the flint. So it connects to the land that I'm from, the land where my mothers are from, my grandmothers are from. So we know that women have stewardship over the land and over the waters. However, we also know that women are often left out of those decisions. Indigenous women, Indigenous youth are left out of discussions. And yet we reap a lot of, we bear the brunt of the consequences more heavily. So I talked about the Hanagari Wedekwa. So as I was talking about earlier, when I started understanding my responsibilities, this was just fresh in my journey in 2012. I was just 2 years sober and first year undergrad at York University, and I was on my way home. It was like December, and I was on the go bus to go back home, and I don't know more started erupting. And I'm on my phone and I'm seeing all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I start calling the local Native Center called Six Nations. I'm like, who's going to Ottawa? I want to get on that bus to Ottawa, and I want to be there for that December 21st rally. And nobody was going. I couldn't find anybody. So then I was like, well, what about your community? You guys matter too. It's important that everybody down here, especially because of where we're located. We're located, it's 16 kilometers to Niagara Falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. I grew up there, and I'm very blessed to have grown up there. Like, my sisters and I had an enriched childhood in those waters. But I was like, what, like, my community, there's such a strong Haudenosaunee presence on both sides. It's important for Haudenosaunee and non-Haudenosaunee alike to know and to be informed about what's happening. So the picture on the left is our first gathering on the Peace Bridge. There's about 28 of us there. The youngest was my little brother at 4 years old, and then the oldest was an older woman. I won't say the age. And the second picture was January 6th event. There was over 300 people up on the bridge coming from both the US side and the Canadian side. That picture doesn't show everybody. It's just a glimpse of it. But leading up to that event on the right, I started getting very nervous and anxious. I felt like I didn't know enough. I felt like it was bigger than me. I was young. I think I was 23 at the time. I felt I was reading all night long, trying to get as informed as I can on this Bill C-45 and how it's going to impact us. I wanted to know more so that I really knew what we were standing up for. And I started getting nervous, and my fears were creeping in, insecurities, and I started having dreams. And the dreams were right there on the river. I had 3 dreams leading up to that. There was only like less than there was 2 weeks between those 2 events, and I had 3 dreams that kind of helped give me that guidance. And the first one was about polar bears. They washed up along the river. It was a mama polar bear and 2 of her cubs. And I was like, what are you doing here? And I jumped in and I managed to grab the 2 babies and pull them out. And I was thinking like, no, like this is not a good sign. They shouldn't be here. And I think it goes back to what John was sharing earlier about what's happening up north. The other dream I had was of an orca. And the orca was down in the Niagara River, and I started singing a water song with it. We love the waters. It's the waters are precious. And me and this orca, like I'm petting her down and we're talking telepathically and we're singing this water song together. And again, I'm asking her, what are you doing here? And a couple of nights after that, I was reading a book from a BC Indigenous author. And it was like totems and what they meant. And I was reading this book to my 4-year-old brother, and the orca came up, and it was like the communicator speaks for the ocean. And I was like,
Oh, there you go.
okay. And then the third dream I had, it was we were walking up the bridge, and there was like thousands of our people, of our ancestors with us, singing and drumming. And I knew that we were not going to be alone, that, you know, despite my insecurities, I have to set that aside, and I just have to be a worker bee and do what I could. So I found the people that could be the voice, and I just did all the planning. So this is kind of my origin story for stepping into my responsibilities. I don't really like to call it advocacy work because it implies something else when I look at it as my inherent responsibilities. So then fast forward, I did a lot of work, as mentioned in my bio, through my undergrad, doing different advocacy and different events for like missing murdered Indigenous women and girls and inclusion, everything like that. But then towards the end of my undergrad, you know, Standing Rock, the No Dapple fight started. And I started being really conflicted because it was starting in September. The lower picture, I went to Washington, DC, and that's my little sister there. And then with Shailene, and then when Standing Rock happened, I took off in September and went there. So that's me and Winona LaDuke, and on the front line there, Mama Chugs, she had put her arm, she cemented it to that machine so they couldn't continue the development. Dennis Banks, I was looking last night when I was compiling these pictures, and I have an audio of the late Dennis Banks, and the clip at the end is Bury My Heart at Standing Rock. And I wanted to share that, but I was like, oh, it's emotional. And then, so that was the start of September. And then just the other picture is me back there in December. Classes ended December 4th, and I left for Standing Rock December 5th and brought 3 of my sisters with me that time, and a truckload of supplies and her son's homework.
Gotta do the homework. You're not Standing Rock.
I love it.
Yeah, yep. So Don reached out to me. I finished my undergrad, and then I started working in my home community there, because that's part of our teachings too, is that reciprocity. You have to give back to your community. So I started working there, developing a healing program for Indigenous adults going through the justice system. And then Don reached out to me about this water project, and kind of acknowledging the work that I was doing. And she said, I want to help you to get to the United Nations. And I thought it was like, what? A dream. So I went and met with her and her team, and they helped set me up and applied for project access training and the United Nations Voluntary Fund, which I received both. And I went there, I was in New York to 2019 for 3 weeks. And these pictures are from our Project Access Front delegation. And then this is our picture of us when we did our side event at the UN that year. And this is actually the same day I found out I was pregnant. I was here for about 2 weeks and I was super tired. And I know that the days are long and tiring, but there wasn't enough coffee in the world that made me feel better. And I was like, this isn't like me. So I took a test and I realized I was pregnant, and it just made the whole experience that much more impactful because of what we were doing. It's literally all the work I did up to that point and all the work I continue to do are for the future generations, but it was like, they're here, you know? So, yeah, oh yeah, I found out when I got home, I was pregnant with twins. Yeah, so it was very impactful. And this is some more pictures, because then as Betty was sharing, and thank you for that, I went to a side event, and here I am, just this like 23-year-old me. This day that I spoke in this picture at the bottom, I went in by myself, and Betty and Bev came and they found me and they said, you're one of us, you need to come and sit with us, like you're Haudenosaunee, come on. And so they took me under their wing, and you know, and I ended up sitting with them, and I delivered an intervention on the impacts of borders or mining and things on Amazon and connecting it back home. And so I had their support. And then I was in a side event with Canada, US, and Mexico and Indigenous peoples. And a lot of people were just like, yay, Canada, you are so amazing with your Indigenous relations. And my palms were sweating like these week. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't take this.
This is the one I was talking about. You go ahead. I love this story.
Yeah, I just, because my major, my education is in social science, so the look of societal injustices from multidisciplinary lens and Indigenous studies. So I was sitting there and I was like, no, and I just kind of unleashed some data and some stats, and you know, about our situation in Canada and how the missing murdered Indigenous women, there's more children in care now that at the height of residential schools, that we still don't have clean drinking water, their mistreatment of Tskahe, all of these things I put out there. And then these guys, Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee, came and found me afterwards, and they said, wow, like, great job, we loved what you said. And then they invited me to go with them to the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples. So 2019, I went and delivered an intervention there. And Tskahe Levi General is actually like my third great uncle. And so a lot of the work that I've done, and it kind of interconnects, kind of amazing, like it's like mesmerizing in that way. But the work I've done, it's kind of like, I feel like guided in a sense. And then you see that rainbow going across our picture. I think for me, like I look for little things of affirmation all the time. And that was one of those moments that I asked them. We went to a meeting with the mayor of the city of Geneva, and I said, where was this picture taken? And he brought us there. And so we took our picture there, our delegation, and that rainbow came up. Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. So then water is life. What can we say? 60% of our body is made up of water. And you know, we talk about our bloodline, we talk about where we come from, but imagine what world it would be if we kind of introduced ourselves like, the water in me honors the water in you.
Mm-hmm.
The water in me honors the water in you. Like we get that interconnectedness to all of us. It's despite where we come from, our cultural background, wherever region we're from. If we honored the water inside of us, if we honored the water that we each carry, that it sustains us all, then I think that the world would have a lot more peace and harmony, because we'd be a lot more kinder and respectful to one another. But we're so caught up in looking at differences all the time that we miss what interconnects us. So, you know, when I was pregnant with my girls, I had a midwife, and I couldn't deliver them at our Six Nations Birthing Center because they were twins. So, but she gave me some teachings, and one of them, she said, back in the day, our women, when they would have water, or when they had their babies, they'd have them outside, and when that water broke, it would send signals to all of creation. It would send that signal to the world that new life is here. And so then the birds would come and they would greet that new life, and it would send that signal into the soil, into the trees, and all of creation would come and honor that new life. And I just thought that was super beautiful. And my twins, my midwife also, she held up their placenta when they were born. And first of all, before she held it up, it formed a heart. And then she held up their umbilical cords, and it was the tree of life, which again connects to our creation story and when Sky Woman fell through that tree of life. And I think that it just it connects that traditional knowledge that we have with what is happening today. So what do we need is a global shift in consciousness. We need to shift from this neoliberal ideologies of like short-term profit, and we need to shift to like that spiritual and interconnected consciousness where we are all related, and let's take care of each other in that way. And that's my little brother there when Kasha, she hosted the No Nestle campaign. And lastly, to close us off, there's lots of prophecies out there, but this one is particularly a guiding one for me because it talks about a time when, you know, our tree of peace and our teachings will start to fall and all of our chiefs will be holding on, and then the youth, the 7th generation, which Kasha and I are since colonialism, will help to hold that tree up. So that's all I wanted to say today. Now I'll let her
I'm like, I was so excited, I'll never forget that day. Now I would like to introduce to you Makasha Looking Horse. She was born on Six Nations territory and is Mohawk and Lakota. And she has completed Lakota and Mohawk rites of passage ceremonies on both territories. She has been a Sundance leader for the women for 11 years and is most known for her activism with Six Nations on water security. She has held many protests fighting for clean water for her community and has worked alongside traditional government, including by handling Nestle a cease and desist letter on behalf of the Confederacy. Were you going first? Were you gonna go before Lisa? Yes. Yes, okay, just making sure. She has completed the Six Nations Traditional Medicine Practitioners course and is currently a student at Masters University. She's a youth leader of Global Water Futures, Indigenous, where she is now the host of a live streamed vodcast series called Indigenous, Let's Talk Water. She has presented and led blessings and ceremonies at numerous local and global forums, including as a member of the United Nations Global Youth Caucus at the United Nations Climate Summit. So I'm excited to introduce her. And this is Dawn's beautiful daughter. I'm just saying because brilliance doesn't fall far from the tree. So thank you and welcome here, and we're just very excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Betty and Yahweh, for the introduction and for the rest of the panelists here. Everybody's been so amazing, and it's definitely probably hard to follow up with those amazing presentations. But I am Dr. Donna Martin Hill's daughter, and I'm also a daughter of Chief Orville Looking Horse. And I'm super happy to be here. Maybe we can go. So I come from a long line of leaderships within my mother's side and on my father's side. My my father's a 19th generation keeper of the white buffalo calf pipe, and my mother also has huge responsibilities and leadership roles, and so learning from them both throughout my life has been a huge, obviously like a huge learning experience, and a very unique one because I got to go through, I've been a sun dancer for 14 years, and I also am a leader of the women for the Sundance ceremony. And I also went through both of my rites of passages on my father's side and on my mother's side. And they were both 4-year commitment. And so, from a young age, from the age of 12 years old, that's kind of where this journey of water comes from. And it's like Chris has said, it's not like one thing that I want to wake up and do one day. It's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to take care of the future generations. And so that's where it all started from, was from is sun dancing, which is fasting for 4 days, no food or water, and praying for the environment, for our family, for our people, and essentially the world, because we have 4 days to think about everything and pray for everything. And so at the age of 12, I learned the spiritual and the spiritual connectedness to water and how important it is, and to pray for it and to visualize it healthy again, and visualize our future generations having a struggle-free life and with when it comes to water, when it comes to basic human rights like housing, and the access of water, and visualizing that they are playing in a clean river system or a clean ocean. And so I visualized that for a long time, ever since I was 12, every single year, and giving everything that I could give, and praying with my heart, and giving everything, at every single year ever since then. And so that's kind of where it all started. And so I have this connectedness and this passion. And I'd say it's way more than a passion. It's some responsibility. It's way more than that. It's kind of hard to find the words for it. And then I went through my rites of passage, which was yeah, I don't know, you can say it there. Then I went through my rites of passage where where we take time when we're going through adolescence, by ourselves in the woods for 4 days with no food or water. And so during that time, then you get to focus on yourself and what you want, and clear your mind, and not have any distractions, and say, what do I want to do with my time? How do I want to help my community? And so through adolescence, you get to have that time to yourself to figure out what you want to do and where you want to put your energies. And so that was around when I was 16, and that's with Ecological, and that's one of the images that Bev showed earlier. And that led me to the work of water. And so one of the ways to ask what is the role of youth in promoting sustainable water governance, as a SDG 6 practice. And so this is part of the Indigenous work, and working for Indigenous is answering this question is what we're doing. And part of it is knowledge mobilization. So Indigenous, I think you already know everything about Indigenous, you could never know. But this is my part, specifically, is working within the community and on the ground, going into schools and developing water awareness through outreach and mentorship, community events, and social media presence. Our initiatives are engaging with youth and working with local schools so students can get accreditation for contributing to the research project. Like I said, I go into the different schools, and we're able to apply like all of the things that my mom had just mentioned that we do, like the virtual reality, the mapping, the mental health piece, going into the schools and doing that is a huge part of it, and being on the ground, working in the community. And so the huge difference is within our youth is that they focus and view water because it's in our stories. And like within our rites of passage, we're taught by like aunties and uncles, our responsibilities. And so from a young age, it's taught that we have to focus on our responsibilities to water, and we value water, and we see water as a life giver. So one of the other things when I learned that all of the horrible things that we found that in our water, and knowing that Six Nations is in a water crisis, I found out that Nestle was taking 3.6 million liters of our aquifer water, but that was just out of one plant, and there's two three other water extraction plants. And so I found out this information, and at the time I was really mad, and I was really mad at what was happening, and that our water quality was so bad, and that there was 5 different heavy metals within our tap water, and that our lakes and our streams and our river systems were super polluted. And then I found out that Nestle, this huge corporation, was taking our aquifer water without our knowledge, without our consent, and so we gave them a cease and desist, and the Confederacy did and I delivered it on their behalf. But that took a lot of effort, and it was a long time, and but it was good. I had a huge support group, and we were able to deliver it. And then the first time that we did, the following year they sold to Blue Triton, which is also Nestle, but they just renamed themselves. And so then we went to the Confederacy and we told them, and we let them know what was happening, and we then we issued them another cease and desist. So that time they said that they were too afraid and they just wanted us to email it. And so I said, I'm not gonna email it, I'm gonna hand deliver it. And so we had a rally and we marched down to the Aberfoyle extraction plant. And there was a phone there in the foyer, and there had all the extension numbers, and I called the head person and I said, I'm here to deliver the cease and desist on behalf of Confederacy, and the hard copy is right here along with the moratorium. And then turned around and read it to the media. And so so what we need, I'm short for time. So I also have a podcast called Indigenous, Let's Talk Water, which is located on YouTube, and we have around 30 episodes, and each one has a grandmother, a community person. Yeah, a community person, and just great grassroots people, and it's all located along with a scientist. And so we're also writing in the Princeton book, and we're going to be published within the Princeton University Press. So that's in the works. And yeah, I think I have to stop there.
No,
But
I'll wrap you.
okay, so I want to introduce and bring out my auntie Lisa Bellinger. I've known her since I was a little girl sun dancing, and so it's super happy that we're able to reconnect here in the big city, and because that's in South Dakota, way from here. And so Lisa, she is the director of AIM and board member of the International Treaty Council, and she's also a school teacher. So would you be able to just say a few words?
Your declaration.
Oh,
That's what
would
we're
you be
doing.
able to
Yes,
read
sure.
your declaration? I don't know.
I think it's in the other bag.
Oh, I might have it.
Oh, here it is. So,
No, just to call the action part, just a part of
Yeah,
it.
maybe do the recommendations.
Yeah, the
and
recommendations.
action item. And we understand if folks have to go, but
Yeah.
you know, if you could just indulge us for just a few short minutes.
And we'd like signatories to this Indigenous
Yes.
Water Declaration. It is on the United Nations website, so you can go look it up there, and I think Indigenous is gonna be adopting it, and I just wanted to segment Lisa so that people are made aware, including our leaders back home, that there is a water declaration now.
Okay, thank you, and first of all, I wanna say I'm so proud of the work that she's doing around water and being that international spokesperson and, you know, carrying her mother's footsteps forward. You know, her mom is a very big leader out here and has done a lot of work in her community. To see Makasha step up, and it's always makes me feel good to see our young people step up, you know. And I remember being in the room and having elders, you know, when I was in high school saying, you never know, you might be the next, and I'm like, no, not me. But you know, it just happens, and she's doing such a beautiful job. So this is some points, the last 5 points of the declaration, or 6. Recognize, support, and respect Indigenous people's scientific knowledge, cosmovisions and time-tested practices for the preservation, protection, management, use, and distribution of water in all its forms, and to ensure the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in the creation and implementation of national and international policies affecting and addressing water, including Indigenous knowledge holders, women, and youth. There's a bunch after that, but jumping to the conclusion, we offer the following commitment to be added to the commitments of the UN 2023 Water Conference. Indigenous peoples commit to actively engage, coordinate, and plan with national, regional, and local governments as well as UN bodies based on their full participation of our rights and respect for the value of our contributions in order to produce positive results for the protection of water and promote solutions that benefit our future generations, the natural world, and all of humanity. So finally, we request that the United Nations Secretary General register, post, and circulate this declaration as an official document submitted for the United Nations Water Conference. So as she stated, it is on the website, and we are still collecting individuals and groups to sign on to this declaration.
Yep, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Before we close, Jack is going to finish by doing the closing for us. And thank you for coming back. You're amazing. You're like all over the place. But I want to encourage you to go to Indigenous website, follow everything that they're doing. It's amazing work. I can't stress that enough. Please consider signing on to the water declaration. And Jack, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Yeah, when I spoke Wiggy, yeah, can't win that. They go to get what don't go on go has no. I'm going to speak in Seneca because that's the shortest language out of all the hood. You left me no choice. So I'll say a closing, and for everybody listening, it's very similar to how we began. We bring our minds together again as one, and we express our gratitude for having spent the time together in peace and experiencing this wellness of thought. And you've certainly received a lot of information and food for thought to ponder and consider and see which way you can contribute to the ongoing matter of our very existence, really. So our Thanksgiving address is to give thanks again for Mother Earth in all that she holds, and also the workers above the earth. They tend to the creation and keep it in balance and harmony, as well as sustain the life sustainers. And we finish with our Creator. We say that's the great benevolence that we're receiving from our Creator day and night. So we'll begin with that. And I'll also say a few words at the end. I will ask that everybody return home safely and return under our roofs, is what we say in the language. So, and also the paths we have to travel on, we hope that all is good and everybody returns in good health and safely, and have received some food for thought from the day. So Nếu bên này cái thì chỉ có thèn cho nó tết xong qua với xong qua nhà nóc to thì rồi vì ở con này cái để qua nhà nóc to nó nhau rồi về hết nè ở này cái nè Scott thì chỉ qua những gọi này gọi xong đó thì tôi được nó nhỏ hình như vậy đó cái đó này hồi nhiều tao này gọi này gọi đó này họ có nhiều giờ số thì nhiều giờ số này họ về ở con này điều quay xịt cái sao coi thì nó ở ngoài giờ đi đó này họ có này nó đi đó như nó tên này cái này xong qua dân phần này thì họ có này cái nhiều ý hóa cả mà họ về ở nó được quay tập con chị cái nó tao nhớ đó là đông vị tao nhớ này ông quay hòn thì nhiều bên nó được trong cái đại sứ yếu con này cái giống kiểu nhé vì hết cái chân nó này cho cái đất nó nhỏ thì tôi thấy chỉ nó nhỏ chỉ nó ngoài giờ đấy này họ có nên là squat cái hồi nó này hình như họ vì cái tôi thấy chỉ nó nhỏ đó này hồi nhiều tao nên quản lý quan đó này họ có nên cái ini nó này đó nhỏ số cái đó đó vì cho nên tôi này có quan sát thế này ta qua thì số thì nó là gì số mà đi có vấn đề gì nó đó này họ có nên cái này cái chân nó này cái nó nhỏ đó này họ phải nhiều tao nên quản lý quan đó này họ có nên cái này để khó cái qua này họ sẽ cái cái đồ sẽ qua chỉ để sẽ nó qua này họ có nên cái về hết cái chân nó này sẽ qua nó nhỏ đó này họ phải nhiều tao nên quản lý quan đó này họ có nên cái về ông có nên đi đi cái họ này sẽ có đó nó này sẽ hết cái qua chỉ số thì nó qua này họ có nên cái chỉ số đó cái công việc đó sẽ cái công việc đó chứ đó này họ có nên cái chân nó này để sai cái nó nhỏ nếu soi cái quaนี่คนนั้นก็นี่ดิฉันด่าเสียตอนนี้เขาไว้เนี่ยแต่ของวันนี้ก็ตอนนี้เขาคนนั้นก็เกี่ยเนี่ยnoดีไปที่ยงยอดเกี่ยวเนาะยงที่เนี่ยต้องสแกนตัวน้องตัวเนี่ยตอนนี้ก็จะนอนนี่จะใส่กินนอนเนี่ยไปนี่เห็นที่ที่ยงยอดเกี่ยวเนาะนี่เขาคนนั้นก็สิด้วยได้สิด้วยก็เนี่ยเนาะนี่ก็เนี่ยได้อยู่ตอนนี้เขาไว้เนี่ยแต่ของวันนี้ก็ตอนที่น้องสิจุดตักว่าทางวันจะได้นี่สมควรจะนกตาให้จุดเหตุเดี๋ยวใส่ต้นจะน่าเต้นอยู่ว่าสแกนตัวน้องตัวเนี่ยวันนี้แสดงว่าสุดเดียเนี่ยตอนที่ให้เขาคนจะนอนนี่สักวันเนี่ย anh đi đi này còn gì hết trong số quân đàn nóc tao thì chụp hết đó này hơi nhiều tao không quản này coi đó này hôm nay cái có cái nhiều cái nó ghép này nó đâu vậy có bạn nó thì cái này đấy nó thế này số thân là gì cái nó ghép ở trong khối này cái đi vào stone chứ thì nó nhiều quá cái đó này hơi nhiều tao không quản này coi đó này hôm nay cái này thì tôi xong quá sẽ này ở quê có scan nó họ sẽ quay họนี่จุงว่าดัสกวดเดียนอยู่นี่เขาคนนั้นกันเนี่ยตาหินองก็เห็นอยู่วิวดูตอนวิเฮกที่สกอตต์ไว้ยังกว่านี่ก็ว่านี่โดยส่วนภาษาวัดวันนี้ตอนนี้เขาไว้เนี่ยแต่เนี่ยกว่านี่ก็แต่สวีเฮกที่ทุนวัดกุญยสยี่ก็หัวดัดเจแต่เนี่ยสวัสดิ์นัดเจแล้วก็กุญนี่วันนั้นดิสคัชชันก็กว่านี่ก็ว่าส่งตอนนี้เขาในเนี่ยตัวของสวัสดิ์นี่ก็ว่าตอนนี้เขา
That was the fastest I've ever seen you do it.
That's an underwater. You got to be in shape for an underwater, the Seneca language.
Just so you know, there's not many that can speak 5 or 6 languages and recite and he can recite them for days. So we're lucky to have a treasure like Jock and Lori, a treasure like Lori. So many Yahwehs for all your hard work and dedication. No time
Take
for
care, everybody.
questions.
Email your questions to Lego.
We're gonna eat, and then they probably want to go because they've been in the room for 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
But
my dog.
everybody.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Lori.
That was fast, John.
You're not,
Thank you.
You're gonna what?
like, let questions?
Yeah, no, you can ask questions. It's just, I didn't want to keep talking.
Okay, everyone shut up.
You can talk. We got the room until
We're like,
5.
nope, you're out.
So did you have any? Yep.
Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson from Toronto Metropolitan University. I won't honor the name we used to be. And I just want to say I'm really impressed and moved by the stories you've shared today. And I think it shows the potential, the partnerships between academics and communities and youth and what can be done. And what I was wondering, and maybe I missed it during the COVID period and that, but there's a critical point, I think, and there's communities across Canada where similar stories are unfolding. Partnerships are being formed, youth are being mentored to tackle their environmental challenges. We see the Guardians Initiative, Global Water Futures, and there's been a shift in government funding directed to communities, but many communities are still limited in their capacity to be able to engage in that. They don't even know where to start, or are limited to hiring external consultancies that do nothing. Is there something that we should start to collectively think about organizing as a Indigenous-centric conference, or to bring these different groups and individuals together to focus on these stories of how to join together and move this forward, and send a declaration specifically to the Canadian government, the Canadian provinces, to say this is the frameworks are being developed. These are the approaches that are working. These are the ways we should move forward. That, you know, where at a conference like this, they're all over the place, but something to come together, because I find, you know, colonialism and academics has siloed and broken everything up to silence. This brings people together to strengthen. Is anything like that?
I mean, I'll answer just, and I'm sure John might, because we've had this conversation. So we have tried, we put together the most incredible teams, youth, women, communities, all across top tier, meaning CRC level researchers, meaning they're the best in the country. And we've been turned down 5 times. So we've submitted proposals to the Environment Canada Climate Change, for a think tank, for a center, so that we could help, like, we work with many small communities that don't have researchers and PhDs every other corner. Six Nations is surrounded by 5 universities. We're very lucky in that way. Others are not. So we were willing to help out, give our sensors. I've tried to get Orville. I've tried to have meetings in South Dakota. That's been fun. Like, we've reached out to many First Nations, Northern Alberta. They all signed on, and we still didn't get funding. We went to NSHRC for 7 years, you know, being able to do Indigenous-led ecological research, train youth. We have the university sign on. Think that we got it, didn't get it. And then the most recent one by Jay, and I thought, oh, okay, he's got 1,000 publications. Maybe that's what the requirement is, and he didn't get it. And I'm like, what is going on, Canada? Like, all of these water research with Indigenous people is not like there's a disconnect,
Yes,
right?
very much so.
So I feel like they're almost, they don't want it. They don't want it. So I just thought, okay, well, we're gonna have to play another game at an international level, go to the World Bank, and we're looking into, you know, people in London who are working with people like the World Bank, and saying, we gotta find other avenues as nations, because Canada doesn't wanna fund it, even though they're on the news yesterday saying they will. And I know John has a lot to say about the Canadian Water Agency, so. Indigenous component.
Yeah, in Global Water Futures, it's nearing the end of the program right now. And so, I believe it's next month in Stolzis near Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. We're having a gathering of the Indigenous communities and that have been involved in Global Water Futures research. It's about 35 total that have been engaged, and this meeting is being run by the Indigenous researchers and their communities, and run for a few days there. So it's a start, but it's also a chance to start to synthesize the information that's been brought together, and hopefully that can be a guide for other projects in the future. There's no renewal for Global Water Futures. There's no renewal for the Indigenous.
Indigenous either.
Yeah, it just ends. And this is a structural problem in Canada, that we build things up and then let them fall down. I think we've been doing it since the Alvaro era and maybe long before, but anyway, it's there's an absurdity to this. And and so there have been some very, very good practices and incredible insights that have built up in Indigenous and other the projects within the program. And I'm just very sad that there's no way to keep supporting them.
So what I'm suggesting is what you're doing, but trying to bring all of us together to send a strong message that this is unacceptable, because the same thing has happened with my projects with Inuit in the North. We get funding for 1 or 2 years, we get a project started, we get it going, and then they want to move on to something different, and you cannot have sustainability when you don't have
exactly, it's anti-sustainable
Yeah.
model. So I think the other thing though is we need our leaders.
Yeah.
Because they give the money to, in Canada, the Assembly of First Nations, and say, well, we're giving it to the chiefs. Well, I have never in my life been asked to be Assembly of First Nations by any chief. So half of them are signing on to the pipeline. So these are not people that necessarily, so there's an issue with, gender in leadership in Canada as well as in the States. So when they're signing on to pipelines, half of them are against it. That's not like, where else do you give political actors research money? Like, I don't know, but in Canada, that's what they do. They give it to the chiefs who are there for 4 years and may or may not know what to do. So they get consultants instead of investing in capacity of their own community. So those are some problems, but it's not just the UN, the government. We have our own issues.
There's a precedent for sustainability, like at decolonizing water governance, what we've done is to get Grand Council Treaty 3, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and Treaty Relations Commission to continue to fund some of the work. It's on a macro scale, right? But I think there is an opportunity to do that kind of work and a precedent for it, and to get people together to share, continue sharing these stories. And like the instructions that the elders gave to us in our territory was, you have to continue this work no matter what. So I did an annual gathering. I had shin splints. I was running all over the place using my own money, and that's what we do. I agree it's not sustainable, but there's some places that we can continue to do that work and lend support to each other.
Yeah, because coming together and sharing is so important, and the stories that you have, the stories that the North have, they're being told in different places. They need to be told all together.
Yeah, just find a way, find the resources. We'll be there. Yep, another question?
Just a comment, Fred Rona, I'm currently hold a SPAR research chair in integrated process at the University of Calgary. But I've worked with communities, Indigenous communities, since the 1990s. Henry Lickers was my mentor when we did the work jointly on the Northern River Basin study, so many years ago. And we made some significant progress back in the 90s, and then we regressed dramatically on the issue of lack of sustainability. A complete lack. I mean, I led an international project under International Polar Year in the Arctic on freshwater systems. It's a flash in the pan. The federal government put, and I worked for the federal government then, huge amounts of resources, nothing in mind of what you keep. So you built up the expectations of communities. You started going in there to basically say, we're going to work with you or whatever, and then we pulled out. I mean, you just could not sustain, there was no funding levels. I mean, they have some programs. I mean, you're aware of, AirMat it was funded by SHRC and other things. It's one project. It's very
We've done SHRC, CHR,
yeah, it's very limited.
ECC, like the big one, the Canada Research Excellence Fund for 30 million, and we've done it all. It's been no, but the thing about us, we're not going anywhere. With or without money, I've been doing this since like I was her age, 20 some years, starting Indigenous studies, not getting paid a dime, doing undergrad, finishing from a women's shelter. We do this no matter what. And the government seems to not matter in many respects because we're gonna get it done, but we shouldn't have to do it in the way that we are our own sacrifice. But we will. Indigenous will continue no matter what. It just won't,
Right.
it won't be able to do the magic it's done with little resources. We didn't have a lot, you know, we didn't have much. In the big picture to what some people, you know, secure. And I know that Henry, we had Arquette come to Six Nations, the chair of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force. And he said that we've done more in a couple of years than they did in 10. So I know that they like the work that we've done.
One of the first things that they cut on grants, when they put them in, is they don't understand that you need to build relationships.
Yeah.
And it takes time to build that and the trust with members of the communities and others to do that. And it's the first thing that they remove. I've been on selection committees at NSERC and other areas, and that you put that into your grant application. Many people that are actually adjudicating them have no experience or no idea of what it takes to work.
Well, that's why I'm getting those peer reviews are so important. Everybody's like, why are you doing that, Dawn? Because you have to change the way who is reviewing our grants.
Right.
And they have to be trained. And now we have it set up really good. The problem is, when it gets to the higher level, engineering type science grants, they are the slowest to be inclusive of Indigenous reviewers. So they get me, and I fight like a dog for anybody that's Indigenous or colored women, but it should be like over half of the reviewing team. But we are changing, like, you know, that work is happening, but not fast enough.
One thing we did in Global Water Futures at the beginning, I think we made mistakes, but we said, okay, we're following tri-council review procedures, and so we get these applications in for projects, and because Canada's a small country, we send them all out internationally. So an awful lot went to Europe and all that. And they came back and they came with a pretty narrow view of what they thought science was and what knowledge should be created in the program.
Yep.
And that's when we realized we had a problem, talked to Dawn, visited Six Nations. What we came up in the end is we threw that out completely and set up an Indigenous advisory panel and let them do the reviewing. And they managed the reviewing of this, and also the proposals, all the rules for the proposals, the guidelines, the objectives and all that were set in the meeting of Wanuskewin it was by consensus with everyone gathered in that room. So that's different, and that was probably in trouble with tri-council. I'm not worried about it, but it didn't follow the rules anyway. But we also said it to them and said, these should be your rules in the future. And so I hope some of that survives somehow and carries on, because we made a few steps there, I think.
So you need legacy to it, you know, and it comes back to the program Global Water Futures. You know, is a significant program. You've made significant development, but it's the next generation of researchers and others that basically need to follow those types of footsteps. And just based on history, often you start again. And then that's what we keep doing, is starting again rather than learning from the past.
Great point. So I'm go live, where we have lots of viewers, and I was gonna say,
Did they have no questions?
they didn't have any questions, and they
Okay.
really enjoyed all the panelists, and they thought it was really great
Did you tell them about Elizabeth Taylor and
Ah.
why she's in there at our side table session?
Yeah.
We had a room change in the last minute.
It's like, I don't remember.
Well, thank
She's the one behind
you.
me, how do I?
And now everybody everybody who's watching from home, and to our community of Six Nations, for attending and watching the panel. And and for listening, and we'll see you hopefully soon again. And Ona.
Mhm.